Good evening to you all. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Monday, August 13th, 2018 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We are delighted you all are here with us this evening. I'd like to call our meeting to order and ask if you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Ms. Conley,
Here.
Mr. Duncan,
Here.
Ms. Hardy,
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse,
Here.
Mr. Snyder,
Here.
Mr. Z,
Here.
and Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Do we have a motion regarding the meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions? The ayes have it. Again, welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are delighted you're here with us. We do have a busy agenda, so if you are speaking tonight, I would ask if you just keep your comments to 3 minutes, and I'll speak a little bit more to that in just a moment. Our first order of business is a proclamation, a special proclamation, and the Vice Mayor is going to do the honors. Ms. Conley?
This is a proclamation in support of the Welcoming America organization and declaring the week of September 16th, 2018 as Welcoming Week in the City of Falls Church. Whereas Falls Church's Vision 2040 envisions the city as a welcoming and inclusive community. And whereas immigrants are a vital part of our community, bringing fresh perspectives and new ideas, starting businesses, and contributing to the vibrant diversity that our city values. And whereas a welcoming environment for all individuals enhances the city's cultural fabric, economic growth, global competitiveness, and overall prosperity for current and future generations. And whereas city residents have encouraged the City of Falls Church to consider membership in Welcoming America. And whereas Welcoming America is a resource for local governments in developing public policy models and helping immigrants become full participants in their communities. And whereas Welcoming America also inspires people to build a community that embraces immigrants and fosters opportunity for all. And whereas Welcoming America is leading a movement of inclusive communities to help make everyone who lives in America to feel like they belong.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby designate the week of September 16th, 2018 as Welcoming Week in the City of Falls Church, and proclaim the city's support for Welcoming America by applying to become an official member of the organization. And I understand we may have two speakers this evening, Mr. Bozen, Ms. Buckles. Welcome to you both. Thank you for your leadership in this area.
Thank you very much for welcoming us. It's appropriate. Thank you. And as Dave mentioned, my name is Paul Boson. I'll make some very brief comments, as will my friend and colleague, Christine Buchholz. To start, we can't thank the city enough for their very active and very prompt response to this initiative. I don't know if the Falls Church city government always moves this quickly, but if you do, you should be managing bigger things. Thank you to Dave, to Wyatt Shields, to Celeste, to others who've been supportive of this in the early stages. Anyways, I ran into Dan Z out walking the dog. He was walking his dog this morning, and he gave me some good counsel, which is to be quick and let the city council ask questions if they have them. So I'll do that. A couple of things. First, I learned about Welcoming America first in the context of Montgomery County, Maryland. Montgomery County has long been a welcoming county. They have activities each fall as something called Welcoming Week. Welcoming America itself is a 501c3. It's Atlanta-based. It's mid-size, appears to be relatively successful. Welcoming America says that 1/8 of Americans lived in something called a welcoming city or welcoming county. Its purpose is to make immigrants and refugees in the communities feel like they belong. Welcoming America believes that all people are valued contributors who are vital to the success of their communities and our shared future. So, how do we start the dialogue about what Welcoming America looks like in Falls Church? And our approach ultimately to Welcoming America here. Here's where I'll keep it really simple. And as Dan suggested, we can come back to discuss whatever you'd like in Q&A. The things I noticed as I've learned more about this movement are as follows. Each is important. I'll share just a couple things. One, it's grassroots. 2, it's a public-private initiative where citizens and the cities or county governments work well together. 3rd, it's very local as character. It needs to suit the local environment. It's not a top-down phenomena. 4th, it encourages people to feel compassion, to relate across languages and cultures, and to get involved personally. It's hearts and minds in these issues. And ultimately, it's 2 ways. Everybody in the community would benefit if this works from an enriched cultural fabric, as well as the vibrance that comes from economic activity associated with immigrant entrepreneurs. So that's enough for now. We can come back to whatever you'd like to discuss in Q&A. And Christine.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Like Paul, I want to thank the City Council for swiftly and wholeheartedly embracing this initiative to launch Welcoming Falls Church. As this is kind of personal for me, my family is an immigrant family, and growing up in Northern Virginia, it was our neighbors who played a pivotal role in our family assimilating into American culture. My parents didn't have much English speaking ability when we first moved into the suburbs, and they were not aware of American customs or how to embrace opportunities that were available for my brother and me. And so it was our neighbors who taught us the American custom of celebrating Thanksgiving and knowing what side dishes to fix with a turkey. And it was our neighbors who told us about the local pool and soccer clubs that my brother and I could join. And they were also the neighbors who taught us how to get involved in our local schools. And so as I think about Welcoming Falls Church, I think it is a personal thing, and I've seen the spirit of it already reflected in our community through many of my neighbors, and especially in the schools community with International Night and Give Day. And so I feel like the City Council embracing this so wholeheartedly really is a reflection of the heart of our citizens. So thank you for helping us to launch it. It seems appropriate that we would be launching Welcoming Week with a booth at the Falls Church Fall Festival on September 15th, which is a Saturday. And it is also the first weekend of the Welcoming Week. And we plan to build on what Paul has seen done so successfully in Montgomery County. And we'd like to plan and execute very thoughtfully and modestly in this first year. And so we plan to have some events that raise awareness. We plan to have events that are relational, something like small group dinners in people's homes where people can have dialogue together, as well as public education workshops. We've got a few ideas of our own, but we're also very open to what the City Council perceives as needs for our community. And we'd like to have programming that supports our community and is meaningful. So we'd like to open it up to any questions or comments that you have for us.
Well, thank you both very much. Are there any questions? Or Ms. Hardy?
Not a question, just a comment. So as a first-generation immigrant myself, this is very personal, so I appreciate this. I think the nation as a whole is going through a particularly dark period, and I really am just thankful for Falls Church being a bright light and citizens like you who are leading us there. So I just wanted to call out that, besides obviously voting and showing up, I think the biggest thing we can do is to lead by example. So I appreciate how much you guys are doing for this and doing for our community. So thank you for giving us hope for the next generation and showing our children what to do.
All right, thank you. Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. Today is a red letter day for me because after searching for the past 3 decades for my naturalization papers, which for whatever reason I can't find, and the certificate, going through all the Homeland Security and Customs and Immigration, lots of meetings, I had finally given up. And if it weren't for the diligence of my wife, who hit upon talking to the National Archives and a young woman named Erin, who, after searching, was able to come up with the court records, and that package arrived today. So heretofore, I was able to say, I'm an immigrant, but I'm a U.S. citizen. I've got papers to prove it. I'm well on my way to finally getting the last set done. I do have a question for you, though. Can you point to a similar sized locality or city that has done this successfully, and what have you learned from their efforts?
Well, thank you for your question, Dan, and thank you for that comment. When you mentioned earlier you might ask this question, you didn't mention similar sized, so
Or a little bit bigger.
We have projected on the screen right now Dayton, Ohio, which is not similar size, but is a very well developed, robust, activities related to, what do I see there? There are stories, it's personalized. There are resources, it's practical. And also there's actionable activities. There's things going on whereby people can connect, to community resources, ESOL classes, legal assistance, with all the right mix of spirit. Okay, a lot of this is heart, but also practical problem-solving kinds of opportunities that, in this case, Dayton presents itself. And I will follow up and look at a smaller city for you and hopefully get back to you.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
I just want to say, I look around the room and I see some of the folks are here from other civic organizations that are already established in the community, and I know they will embrace your group and look forward to working with you, groups like Citizens for a Better City and Village Preservation and Improvement Society, League of Women Voters. I know I'm involved in all three of those to one degree or another, but certainly speaking for CVC as a member of the executive committee, we'd love to have you come to our next monthly meeting and share your thoughts and give us ideas for new things that we can all do together to make this a better community.
Vice Mayor Connolly?
Thank you.
Just, one quick note. So also, the schools themselves. So thank you. That's great. Yes, very, very willing. And there's great things happening. A lot of this is just calling it out. I love the way the Falls Church 2040 strategic plan starts with the phrase about welcoming. So the schools are doing some great things. And if you're interested in learning more, please email. Get your smartphones ready. welcomingfallschurch@gmail.com. Because as we start to get this together, we'd love to know if people are interested. So thank you very much.
All right. Vice Mayor Connolly?
Thank you for doing this. I think it's really exciting, and it is the next step for Falls Church because we're doing so many different things. So I'd like to ask Sally Cole to wave. Sally Cole's in the back of the room. She's the executive director of the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce in the last year and a half has started to do a diversity inclusion effort to encourage local businesses to work together, and they have created partnerships with chambers of commerce, the Asian American Chamber of Commerce, and others, the Arab American Chamber of Commerce as well. And it would be great to work with her on this as well. So she's in the back, and she's awesome.
All right. Any other comments? If not, thank you again for your efforts. We look forward to this public-private partnership between all of us to make Falls Church as welcoming as possible. So thank you so much. All right. Yeah, sure. Why don't you guys come on up? We'll do a picture. Would you like to? All right. And our next order of business, oaths of office. Are there any to administer tonight, Madam Clerk?
I don't believe so. Is there anybody here for their oath of office for a board or commission? No, not tonight, thanks.
Okay. I tell you, since we have so many folks here tonight for Founders Row, we thought we might move the item up forward so people don't have to sit through any other matters. And so, Vice Mayor Connolly, you might have an amendment for us?
Yeah, I'd like to move to amend the agenda so that item 10A2, is that the right one? 10A2 becomes 10A1.
All right. Do we have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Founders Row will be heard just a bit earlier, so hopefully that'll work for folks. Let's move on to the receipt of public comments. Public comment. Madam Clerk, do you want to start with a summary of written comments?
Yes. We had Danny Polinsky of 201 Patterson Street supporting the Founders Row project. Rohini Winters sent several emails requesting a don't block the box striping at West and Grove Avenues. She provided comments on fiscal impacts and asked for a crosswalk at Grove Avenue in the site plan for Founders Row. Monica Fries of 415 Poplar Drive supports Founders Row. Kathy Kleiman of 203 Grove Avenue is in favor of residential parking restrictions and removal of the Grove and Northwest crossing at Founders Row. Leslie Rye of 214 Lawton Street provided comments on the Founders Row project regarding vape stores, retail ownership, and park and recs comments. Jessica Sabo of 301 Riley Street wrote in support of dark sky lighting for the Founders Row project. The Steeples Court HOA provided their comments on Founders Row. Cindy Wackerbarth of 304 Walnut Street asked for more green space and trees at Founders Row. Emily Firmage, 330 Grove Avenue, asked for a crosswalk across West Street to Founders Row. Katie Nemi, 304A Pine Street, asks for a crosswalk at Grove Avenue in the site plan for Founders Row. Lisa Varuxis of 301 Grove Avenue provided comments on the Founders Row project regarding traffic and retail residential phasing. Keith Thurston provided comments on Founders Row regarding traffic, public art, and trees. Ann Polivka of 1005 Jennifer Lane asked that council delay action on Founders Row and reconsider the age restrictions. Wendy Freeman, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, provided comments about the design of the new high school. David Rifkin questioned naming the high school for George Mason. Liz Weatherly of 522 Great Falls Street supports the library design as presented. Rosalie Cosbelt opposed locating the children's room in the library basement. Stephen Mostow of 204 Grove Avenue supports the library design as presented, as does Jessica Sabo of 301 Riley Street. And Andrea Hassani of 330 Little Falls Street opposed locating the children's room in the basement. Vipus also provided comments on the proposed library design. Pat Myers of 115 Buxton Road supports the library's design as presented. And Fred Thompson, on behalf of the Broadway condominium residents, provided comments about a proposed project at Park and Lee. And finally, Chuck Jankowski wrote with concerns about the alt-right using Metro to get to their march.
All right. Thank you very much. So we're now going to move on to the receipt of public comment. So anyone who wishes to speak tonight, you're certainly welcome to. Just ask that you fill out one of these speaker slips. They're in the back of the room, and hand them to the clerk, who's coming over my way right now. When you do get up to speak, if you would be so kind as to state your name and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes, especially since we have so many speakers tonight. When I call your name, if you want to speak when the item itself is called, you're welcome to pass and just go ahead and speak. When the item such as Founders Row is called, instead of speaking now, you're welcome to do so. Just let us know. All right, the first speaker is Fred Thompson. Mr. Thompson, welcome.
Thank you.
Followed by Steve Miller.
Okay, I'd like to thank the mayor and the council for giving us an opportunity to speak. I am Fred Thompson. I'm at the Broadway condominium, 502 West Broad Street, and I have several of my neighbors here, a couple of my neighbors. Several of my neighbors, okay, who expressed a concern about what's being proposed as a development behind us at Park and Lee. We really, Founders Row really plays a role in this, in that we were at a meeting where that was being discussed, and we saw an active community, and we saw the give and take that was occurring with the developer, and it really came to home to us that it was good to get involved in this at the front end, to really try to understand what was going on and try to play a role throughout the development process. So we know this is not a primary agenda of discussion, but we do at least want to be able to put our concerns on the table and ask you to keep us involved and let us be involved throughout this whole process. Our concerns as we looked at this is that, number one, even though there had been a planning commission meeting and a council meeting, there's really been no discussion of the impact of this project on the Broadway condominium, which is really the closest neighbor to this product. In fact, the building would be 10 feet from the property line of the Broadway condominium. And that's our first concern, is that the density of the development, 0.64 acres of development on 0.68 acres of property, that's 94% of that property being developed, 10,000 square feet of greenery disappearing. And in fact, even within that small buffer of 10 feet, they propose to put transformers and equipment that would have to be accessed. So the buffer basically is close to zero. And then on the other side of the building, they propose only a 3-foot property line difference between the building and the building adjacent, which is also designed as a T1. That really relates us to the second concern, which is height. The general West Broad small area plan talks about a scaling down. In this case, this is a scaling up from the Broadway, which is 54 feet. This building would be 68 feet. And I would just like you to imagine two 68-foot buildings 6 feet apart from one another. Is that really the image and the direction that you want Park Avenue to be in the future from, let's say, West Street down to Broad Street? I mean, down to Washington Street. I think that the council has done some excellent things with Founders Row in terms of looking for how it faces the residents of Park Street, and also with the Broad and Washington project, to looking to keep the heights down as it faces that the avenue, the pedestrian and residential area there. But recognize too that as we face that building, we're entirely residential. All of our commercial activity is on Lee Street and Broad. We are entirely residential as we face this building. So the height is a concern. And then finally, the other point is parking, which of course is always a concern. But in this case, as we looked at the study, the parking study is really based on 7 properties. 3 are actually on the,
That's 3.
1 minute? Okay, 1 minute. The 3 are actually on the metro. 1 provides free access to the metro. All the products are 3 to 9 times the size of this building. So we don't think it's a very representative document. So at any rate, what I would say is that we want to be involved, we want to participate, we want to make sure that we're heard, and that was really what we were attempting to do in trying to provide this information to the council.
Thank you very much, and you certainly will be involved in the process.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Snyder.
Fred and all the folks in the Broadway, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for inputting early at this stage. It's very important. The best projects are the ones that work for the neighborhood as well as for the developer and others. So thanks a lot for bringing this to our attention. I think I was on the council when the Broadway was actually approved. So I'm pleased at all the wonderful citizens that are now part of our community. So thanks very much. Again, your comments will play a critical role in the future.
All right, our next speaker is Steve Miller, followed by Andrew Painter. Excuse me? Okay, sure, that's fine. Andrew Painter, pass as well. Okay, Dennis, you gonna pass, or you gonna come forward now? It's up to you.
I'm Dennis Szymanski. I live at 915 Hillwood Avenue, and I'm here tonight as the chairman of the Tree Commission. The Tree Commission has been advocating for trees and green space on this project for 3 years, and we found our efforts have been largely unsuccessful. And so earlier this summer, we submitted a voluntary concession for cash, which is something that we did in a previous project. This isn't something we did with a lot of relish, but just because I don't like the designated hitter doesn't mean I don't watch American League Baseball. So we submitted, and unlike my Chicago Cubs, who hit a walk-off home run to beat the Nats last night, we didn't get an extra base hit, but we did get a hit and participate in the game. So part of the concession that we'd asked for has been granted. What I would tell you going forward is that the Tree Commission is going to continue to advocate for green space and tree canopy as we go forward, and to make it a priority. For the West Falls Church project, we'll be partnering with the Environmental Services Council to try and come up with some specifications to minimize the loss of services to the ecosystem. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for yours and for your efforts. They're greatly appreciated. Our next speaker is Nancy Morrison. Is she available? Okay, sure. Come on forward. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jim Morrison. I'm Nancy's husband.
Okay,
She asked me to do this on her behalf.
sure. Welcome.
Hi. We've taken a look at this for a long time, and we've been up here to speak to you before, and the Planning Commission and before, so I'm sure you have a general idea of what our views are. There's a lot of points that we raised in a letter that was sent to the council yesterday, which I hope you had a chance to review. I'm not going to go through all of them now because I only have a few minutes, but I'll mention some that are of particular concern to the Steeples Court Homeowners Association, whom I represent here tonight. With respect to Steeples Court, which is a one-way street, a dead-end street that goes into west and has no other way in or out. the traffic patterns on West make a great deal of difference to us. So one of the things we've asked for in this meeting and other meetings is that there be some kind of signage indicating that people should not block our street, because we absolutely won't get out if it's blocked up with traffic. And the prospect of that happening is, especially with additional traffic lights being added, is very real. I think we also need to, I endorse those who say that we should restrict parking and provide provision for parking permits for people on Grove and Jennifer and Chestnut and Park and ours on Steeple. The developers have said that there will, they've asked for parking reduction, but they've said that it will only be a crush during Christmas season, and I hope that's right. But it's only fair to hold them to this promise. So I just want to make sure that the streets that we live on are preserved for the homes on those streets. We've also talked about the WNOD pedestrian bridge, and we agree with those who say that there needs to be some kind of an S-curve or a set of bumps or something along the lines of what Arlington has done, as well as aligning the bike path with the traffic light, so that it becomes less dangerous than it is now instead of more dangerous, because it is a very dangerous section right there with pedestrians and bicyclists and cars. I think the changing of the sidewalks would also make sense, to have the sidewalk on the crosswalk between Grove and Northwest, to have a traffic light there. But the one that was originally proposed on the north side of West, right across from Founders Row, we think probably doesn't make as much sense, because there's going to be so many pedestrians trying to cross through traffic there, and there's no light, and there'll be a lot more traffic. Above all, we think that there should be continuing ongoing dialogue between the developer and the city and the neighborhood. Many of the things I just mentioned are steps that the city could take that are not specifically steps for the developer. There's also a concern, I guess I should mention in the little time that I have remaining, about the buffer zone between the single-family residence and high-rise apartments. That's formed mostly by the bushes along the WNOD trail, and they run right along West. If you take out those bushes to put in a sidewalk, which is in itself not a great idea, it will encourage people to jaywalk. But if you take out those bushes, that buffer zone is gone, and you have a very dramatic change from the single-family residences to the high-rise residents. And it would just be better in terms of sight lines and in terms of noise and in terms of a sense of a different neighborhood being there to leave that buffer zone in. I'll stop with that. We don't really feel anymore, in terms of the signatories of this letter, you can look at them from our block and from West and Grove, that this really merits a special exception any longer. There's not that much that's special about it. The movie theater is partly a nightclub, it seems to me, and the bar is a bar. And those are not, just super great additions to the community. But if you do go ahead, I hope you will take into consideration some of the points I made here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Lisa Varoutzis. Sure, absolutely. Rohini Winters? All right. Mike Winters? Okay, all right. Andrea Hassani?
Hi, my name is Andrea Hassani. I live at 330 Little Falls Street. Thank you so much for listening to me and listening to my 2 cents or 3 minutes about the renovation for the library. As a stay-at-home mom of 2 very young boys, I was really upset to see that they were planning to put the children's section of the library in the basement. As many of you know, that it's really hard to get small children to even go into places. And the fact that the library is such a welcoming and inviting place, and it's easy to get them in because It's right on the first floor. It's just been a godsend. I know part of the reason the plan had wanted to have them on the lower level was because it would provide them more space and enable the library to also have meeting rooms for things like story time. But my sons, I know my 3-year-old would never even walk into a closed door or go into a room like this without losing his mind. So the space and the ease of use, I mean, it just can't get easier than having it on the first floor and having it easy for him to get into without, having tantrums and such. Also, the other reason that I was very concerned was that there are a lot of parents who have strollers who use the library for story time, and there are at least, 15, 20 strollers that are parked right outside of the library in the children's section, which we're going to be having to use elevators now to go up and down to have story time and other events for small children. It seems very inconvenient and possibly dangerous. And then my last concern was that by having the lower level of the library entirely for children and the upper entirely for adults, it really doesn't enable a parent who has children, over a spectrum of ages to watch all of them at the same time, because you might have one upstairs and others downstairs, and so it forces parents to sort of prioritize or separate, which I think could ultimately be less safe than having a mixed section on the upper level with adult section and children's section near each other. That is all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for yours. We appreciate you coming out tonight. All right, our next speaker is Alberta Mikolka. Welcome.
I wanted to thank you. I've already sent a letter, and some of you have already replied, and for that, I thank you very much. That was really fast since I sent it today. I'm also speaking about the library and the children's room. I really feel that children should be front and center, and that other libraries that are renovating, such as Silver Spring, Bethesda up in Montgomery County, moved their children's rooms so that they would be, in fact, the primary. When you walk in, there they are. I feel like our children are our greatest asset, and I've only been here a year. When I moved in and I walked into that library for the first time and I heard those kids, I thought, this is great. This is welcoming. This feels wonderful. And I can't understand why we would hide what I see as one of the greatest strengths of our library. And my letter addressed some other concerns, but the only other thing I want to say here today is that I looked over the presentation by the librarian who's going to come, and I just feel like we as the public haven't had enough chance to make comments. That they made their final decision at the end of July, and there were, to my knowledge, some meetings after story time, and then 3 meetings that were during the course of last week. But there are tons of families on vacation now. And having meetings after story time is great, but those are all the little guys. And I feel like in many ways this impacts the older children as well, because right now we have a situation where, yes, you have the story time room, but for those kids who are shy, or those kids who are bigger, or those kids who feel like, hey, I'm not really one of those little kids, they can still kind of hang out and hear what they want to hear and still be a part without necessarily being there. But if you put the kids all in one place, all on the bottom floor, then I think we might lose some of our older children, kids in the transitional ages, sort of the middle school, 5th grade, 6th grade, who feel like, well, I don't really want to be down there. I don't really want to be with all those little guys. But as a parent then, do you want them staying upstairs by yourself? I don't know. I just feel like there hasn't been enough time to explore the issues that moving that children's room downstairs would do. And so I would ask that perhaps you give more time for comments and for the library to explain what the choice they made until after school starts, so that families who have a broader range of children can also weigh in on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker, at least for the moment, is Laura Gogol. Pass. Okay, great. So that's all the speakers I have at this point. If you would like to speak, for example, on Founders Row and haven't put in a speaker slip, you're welcome to do so and speak when Founders Row is called, which will just hopefully be in a few minutes. Are there any council requests at this time? Okay. Let's move on to the report of the city manager, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter and members of council. I'd like to have the majority of my time for the report to allow the Director of Libraries, Jenny Carroll, and our project manager, Kim Callahan, to provide the council with a report. But before we do that, just two things I'd like to report on. One, I'd like to give a plug for this coming Saturday, August 18th. We'll have the kickoff for the comp plan amendment for the environmental natural resources chapter of our comp plan. That will be at 9:45 a.m. starting with a poster session, then formally getting underway at 10:15 with engagement on the topic. We have two guest speakers for this kickoff. Jay Ferguson from Arlington County, and Jay Brenson from the District of Columbia, who will provide some good subject matter expertise, but we want to engage the public on where we're going as a community in terms of environmental resources in the city. So this is a good chance to get plugged into that. So again, this Saturday, August 18th, starting at 9:45 at the Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School. And we look forward to seeing you there. One other little bit of good news, the city has received a grant for Electrify America for electric car charging stations. We've been participating with the Northern Virginia Regional Commission to work to make sure that the city was part of that process. This is all part of the Volkswagen settlement funds. And what it involves is the installation of charging stations at locations yet to be determined, but we want to have them at City Hall. We'd like to have them at the library, at our school facilities, and some private property as well. And at least for the first years of it, it will both be the installation of the charging station and the electricity is paid for through this grant program. And so Kate Walker is leading our comp plan amendment update, which I mentioned just a moment ago, but she was also instrumental in working with council and the NVRC to get those funds for the city. So that'll be good when we roll that out. So with those two announcements, if I can then invite Kim and Jenny just to give a report on our work with the library. And since the council last had this discussion, they presented just some of the options with the blocking and the programmatic decisions. The library board has been giving a lot of thought and hard work on this, and Jenny and Kim have been out on multiple occasions to discuss this with the public and with the people who use the library. So we want to report on that. So I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Carroll.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Tarter and members of City Council. So 3 weeks ago, we came before you and you set us with a task to go into the community and hold some public information sessions about the library board's recommendation of corner entrance and children's located on the lower level. And I'm coming back to you with an affirmation of the library board's recommendation. We spoke with a cross section of the community, including several story times targeting the 0 to 5 age range. And so just to give you a few numbers, for the 3 story times I went to prior to our public information session, so I went on July 26th, 27th, and the 31st. We had a total of 416 children and adults at those meetings. 181 of those were adults. Then we had meetings on Wednesday, August 1st and August 2nd, and we had 19 community members, and that was not including board members or city council members. On August 3rd, it was another story time that I went to, and there were 106 children and 44 adults, and I stayed afterwards. I stayed afterwards at the other story times as well, but I stayed afterwards at this story time as well. They had already heard, a lot of them had already heard my presentation, and I will say at this story time there were all types of caregivers, parents, family members, nannies, and grandparents. And then on August 4th, we went to the farmers market and spoke with approximately 120 people. It was a very busy day. And we were actually there for about 3 hours instead of 2 hours as we had advertised. So we were there from about 8:45 to 11:45. In addition, I've spoken to a number of people throughout the 3 weeks, just in passing, from everywhere outside of Liberty Barbecue to inside the library after story time or as I walk around the library. A majority of the people have expressed being comfortable with the recommendation of the library board, including people who had initial hesitations or reservations about placing children's on the lower level. Excuse me, I think I'm losing my voice. The themes, we did have people who were concerned about getting children and their caregivers into the lower level, concerns about natural light in the lower level, and segregating the children, and what the space would look like. The majority of themes that I heard actually were regarding the relocation and or closing of the library. I reassured most people that the location is closing, however, we are relocating. And then the questions were, where is it? And how long will the location be closed? And then, of course, what services are going to be provided? And in terms of the corner entrance, there weren't as many. There were a few people who expressed liking the corner entrance. There were a few people who expressed liking the center entrance. It was the Falls Church News Press question of the week, and 68% of that vote was for the corner entrance. So our next steps are going to be to go to the board on the 15th, and then to Planning Commission on the 20th as well. And did you have anything to? Okay. And so I would remind City Council and the public, we're only at 5% of design right now. We'd like to get it to schematic design, which is 10% of design. And at that point, we would again come out to the public, of course, for more comment, and to City Council, the Library Board, Planning Commission, and also library staff as well. So I feel like as it stands right now with what we've heard from the public, we would be proceeding with the library board's recommendation.
All right, thank you very much for your efforts. We may have some questions or comments.
Sure.
Or we may not. No, we do. Ms. Hardy and then Mr. Snyder.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate staff quickly scheduling those community meetings and really presenting the case for renovations and the options that was chosen by the library board. I think as Kim and Jody know, I was actually at both of those community meetings and actually counted the number of people. So I went to both of those, and there were about a dozen people there, not counting staff, electeds, various board and commission members. There were a handful of actual citizens. And of those actual citizens, I think there's only one person in each meeting that actually had young children, because I knew all of them.
There were actually some grandparents who had young children as well.
That said, I know that it's August, and it's really hard to get the word out, as everything we've heard from people who've written into us, it's just hard to get people to pay attention in August. And so I would just ask that we keep up our efforts to kind of engage the community, because we don't want people to be surprised. And so I appreciate you going out to the farmers market. I'm a big fan of going to the people, because we can't expect people who stay at home with young kids to come out to meetings Monday night or various community meetings. So let's post boards up in the library, post them up in the community center. Let's give people other ways to kind of engage with us and communicate with us, because ultimately I am concerned that we've probably reached a very small fraction. And this is a very beloved institution in the city, and people are going to have opinions and they're going to want their input heard. So let's make sure we give them every opportunity to do so, because I am concerned that we aren't reaching people when it is mid-August right now. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Snyder and then Mr. Duncan.
Sure. Thank you very much for the work and the work that the library board does. And thanks to all the citizens that have commented, as well as the comments that we've heard tonight. I want to go back to something that I thought was a real the key point for having the children in the lower level, which was the strong recommendation of the chief of police for security reasons. Regrettably, this is not the kind of decision that we probably would have made 30 or 40 years ago, but it's pretty clear we have to include that now, and it's fundamental in my view. Has the chief of police in any way changed her opinion about where, for safety reasons, the children's part of the library ought to be located?
She has not.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's an important element here. I mean, I made the decision to support the renovation of City Hall, not because I thought we needed a new city council chamber, but purely on the basis of safety and security reasons. And so That's what's fundamental in my view. Unfortunately, in my view, that is the number one priority, and everything else is secondary. I also think that we have to do some planning for stroller parking, if you will, and look at ways to make it absolutely as convenient as possible for folks to bring their small children into the library. But again, thanks for all the hard work that people have put into it. Appreciate it.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. I'd like to agree with Mr. Snyder's comment on the security question. One of the meetings that I attended, I heard the chief of police make her remarks, and I thought they were worth everyone's consideration. It's one of those responsibilities, unfortunately, that we have here to think about the worst things that might happen, and at any rate, what Mr. Snyder said ×2 on that. My question is, in my time that I spent at your pop-up tent there at the Falls Church Farmers Market, which was a great opportunity for people to come by and chat informally, and thank you for overstaying the time that you said you'd be there, coming early and staying late. What I observed and heard was that when people saw some of the renderings of what the new children's level would look like, it tended to at least give them new information in their head about how it would be designed in a way that was bright, colorful because of the height of the shelves. The lower level can have more lift to its look than I think the current library basement has, certainly. And I'm just wondering, as we go forward, I noticed on the city's Facebook page that you had some of those renderings up there, but at what point do we get to see, what the vision of the children's level really might look like in a flyover kind of way, one of these nifty videos that we see that helps us visualize what you're talking about?
We'll have a better idea once we get through schematic design, and certainly the designers can create those internal models so that people can get a better idea of what the library could look like. It'll be more finalized once we get into design development, which is after schematic design. That's around 30%. Then we'll have an even clearer picture, but we can start to give people an idea at this next level of design. So I would say in late fall, when we go back out with the initial designs, people will have a better understanding, and we can have them put those models together.
So the next public engagement opportunity, sustained, would include that kind of information?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I think that's good, because I understand people feel very passionately about the library, and that's great. That's why we love our city. But it's hard to have a considered opinion unless you've actually seen the alternatives, I think. So I would encourage whatever can be done to bring that out as soon as possible would help us make a decision as a community. Thanks.
Any Vice Mayor Connolly? Okay.
Thanks for all those meetings. I attended one of them, and it was really interesting to see how people understood better as you spoke and showed pictures, and as the chief spoke about safety, to understand where the library board was coming from. I think that's one of those things that you see and have an immediate reaction to, and then once you understand where the board was coming from, I think that was really helpful. I'm wondering about how big will the elevator be? I know, again, we don't know for sure, but will there be the elevator Harris Teeter could fit 12 strollers.
I don't know if we'll have them quite that big,
Yeah.
but definitely a larger size elevator. I don't actually have specific dimensions yet, but we know that's a concern. So we know that's an investment we need to make in a larger elevator.
Okay.
We know that's important.
And has there been any consideration of putting a ramp around the building in addition to stairs? I know that takes up some of the space, but that could be another way to get strollers downstairs and alleviate some of those concerns that people have.
The architects did look at that as a basic idea. It just takes up so much space. It's eating up a lot of valuable square footage for actual library space.
Right.
So we kind of nixed that and went the larger elevator and kind of an open stairway if we can put the entrance on the corner.
Okay. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing the next round of public engagement and meetings this fall.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you. So Jenny Kim, thank you guys for all the hard work that you put into that. As the liaison to the Library Board of Trustees, admittedly, I had no idea what I was getting myself into with this project. But if we thought some of these city council sessions were intense in terms of debate, constructive criticism within the library board, I can tell you that those meetings related to this project are equally as intense, if not more. So I know there's been a lot of thought put into this. I, for one, admittedly, have also been on both sides of both the entrance as well as the location of the children's library portion of it, and I think that it was very well thought out from you guys. I did just have 2 points that have come up in both public comment as well as tonight, and they don't have to be addressed now. But one was a concern over maintaining the Georgian-style architecture as it relates to the trust that the library sits in, maintaining that particular architectural design. And there was some concern that the way that the corner entrance had been designed initially, that may not necessarily conform as well as we thought it would. And I know that, again, this is all very preliminary, but it's just a point that I thought was well taken. And I can't remember the individual from the public that provided that comment, but that's something that we should look at in terms of final design. And then secondly, a lot of the comments that we've had post-public outreach related to the location of the children's library downstairs has a lot to do with strollers, ingress, egress, and just how difficult it is. And one of the citizens that spoke previously, I think, hit the nail on the head that it's very difficult to get kids downstairs. There was some discussion within our trustee meeting as well as with the designers about putting a vestibule down on the bottom floor and having a second entrance. And I know that adds additional resources from a staffing perspective, additional cost. There may be some other additional security concerns. But just given the amount of public comments we've had that feel very strongly about an easier ingress, egress, and access to that children's library being on the bottom floor, it's something that we probably need to discuss a little bit more intensely before making a final decision if it is decided that the children's section will be on the bottom floor. So again, thank you guys, and I know Brad's here as well as Chet DeLong, and you guys have really poured your hearts into this project, and I hope that the community realizes that this wasn't a flippant decision in terms of even the nuances, and there were some incredibly detailed nuances that were debated inside of those meetings. So thank you guys very, very much for your hard work on behalf of the community.
All right, any other questions? Again, I will just end with my thanks to you and all the folks who have participated in this process. Just a couple comments, some of which I've made previously, but one, if you do go with the corner entrance, I think it's really critical to make sure that we have clear space in front of that corner. There's telephone poles and the like, but just it may not be able to pop out as much towards the street as people might hope, because I think it's really critical that we have ingress, egress that works for people with strollers or disabilities and the like. And so I would just ask you to maybe keep that in mind. In a similar vein, along Virginia Avenue, that even if you have the actual setback, having a building wall there's a sort of a shy zone. People don't want to rub up against the side of the wall. And so you might want to consider even trying to narrow up the tree pits. In other words, not in terms of length, but width, if it's possible, to still have a viable tree there so that we can make sure people can get in and out of the library. I think this location in particular really begs for very easy access for people who are going to be, have their hands full with kids and all sorts of things. And last, I guess I would just continue to ask that you continue your community engagement. It's obviously something that people feel very strongly about, and so I think it's important that when people get back from vacation, they feel they have an opportunity as well to participate in this process. So anyway, that's all I would say, and we look forward to seeing you once again coming up here soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I would just like to say that I really appreciate all of the feedback that we've gotten from the citizens, including tonight, and the community. And I would encourage people my door is always open. Go past the bathrooms, hang a left. That's where my office is. You can email me, you can call me. Public engagement is not just going to be one specific time, but really any time you can come and find me. So
great. Thank you so much. All right. Anything else, Mr. Shields, on your report?
I should just add one thing. We did have a Sunday series last August 5th. The focus on that, this is for the campus project. The focus on that was on the Gilbane Stantec team's designs for George Mason High School. I want to thank everybody who participated in that. The next Sunday series meeting will be on Sunday, September 23rd at 2 o'clock, and we'll get much more public relation, notice out on that. But we look forward to that and keeping people informed in the process. That's all I have.
All right, thank you very much. Without any further ado, Madam Clerk, would you like to call the first item?
Yes, we have TR 18-32, resolution amending resolution 2016-04 to allow the project to replace a hotel use with an over 55 active adult community on approximately 4.3 acres of land located at the northeast corner of 110, 112, 112A, 212, and 212A Northwest Street, 916, 920, 922, 924, 926, 928, 930, 932, and 934 West Broad Street, and 919, 921, and 925 Park Avenue. Real property code numbers 51-202-009 through 51-202-015, 51-202-003, 51-202-004, 51-202-005, 51-202-028, and 51-202-028 outlot, known as Mason Row and renamed Founders Row, on application by Spectrum Development, LLC, and Mill Creek Residential Trust.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. I'll just discuss briefly kind of what the order of business will be of what we intend to do tonight. First, we'll have a staff presentation from Mr. Fuller, who, along with Keita Ruzzi, have been our staff leads in working this amendment to the special exception for Founders Row through our process. They will lead the staff, Mr. Fuller will lead the staff report, but I also just want to note that Mr. Stoddard, our planning director, is here to answer any questions, and Becky Woodsman with economic development is here as well to answer any questions on fiscal impact. The staff presentation will be followed by a presentation by Mill Creek, in our staff presentation, we'll really focus on changes since the work session last week, and there have been changes to the voluntary concessions. And I think the developer's presentation will touch on those as well as changes to the plans as well. And I just want to note there has been a great deal of work on the staff level on this project, and regardless of how things go tonight with the City Council's deliberations on this project, I do want to thank the developer. I think that we all recognize the energy and responsiveness that you've brought to trying to bring this amendment through its proper process. There's been a really deep public engagement. I noted last week that I think we've had more comments on this amendment than we've had on any project in the past. So I want to thank the public for all of its attention and input, and of course our boards and commissions as well. So following the developer's presentation, we would then intend to have the public hearing and then council comments and questions following that. The staff recommendation for the project is approval of the special exception amendment, finding the project as a whole is to be consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan and in compliance with the primary and secondary criteria that are set forth in the zoning ordinance for special exceptions. So that's the basis on which staff evaluates these projects, and that's the staff recommendation. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Fuller for the staff report, and then from there with the developer's presentation.
Thank you. Good evening. As the city manager had indicated, since the work session last week, there's been a lot of work, and so we're going to basically cover that tonight between the developer and staff here. So just to recap for the record, the applicant, Mill Creek Residential Trust and Spectrum Development LLC, are requesting a special exception amendment this evening, and that's to allow a change from a hotel use to age-restricted multifamily. And also the name Mason Row, which was the original approval back on January 11th, 2006 on the original special exception, has been renamed to Founders Row, and that carries forward in the record with this amendment. The development is 4.3 acres, which is the largest project that has come before us on a special exception. In looking at the amendment itself, the requested changes generally include really two elements: the change in use that I mentioned, and the changes to the voluntary concessions, which also support the amendment through a variety of ways. The footprint of the building is the same. The building height is the same. The use inside that building has changed, and the architecture has changed on the exterior, and that's reflected due to the amendment. The council and board and commissions have provided comments. At your previous work session on August 6th, the applicant provided a presentation. They talked about the commitments that they had addressed through the voluntary concessions, which has been an extensive process and has been ongoing up until this past Friday in this meeting, to be exact. At the City Council work session, various board and commission and community organizations' public comments had been summarized and were discussed. Guidance was provided to both the applicant and staff, and the City Council indicated there were several items regarding the voluntary concessions that needed further consideration and refinement. The attachment 13 provides a summary of those comments of your work session comments and request on August 6th. A detailed list there. And the voluntary concessions from the council itself included approximately 6 that were all considered and addressed, as indicated in lines 75 through 106 in your staff report, and they're also reflected in the revised special exception voluntary concessions that were provided in your package, dated August 8th. Staff had several other comments that were also addressed in the VCs, and I'll highlight those as well as the council ones briefly here. Also on the dais, there was one additional VC that was offered on Friday after your package went out, and that was in regard to VC number 11, and that was in regard to $10,000 being added for future tree canopy through the Stormwater and Sanitary Sewer Fund. And so you have this on the dais tonight, and you have a red line version, you have a clean version, and you also have the chart that tracks it all as well. And like I said, there was only one change to that. So there's just that one addition to VC number 11 since your package went out on the 8th. In briefly highlighting these VC changes, number 3, the commercial space and the strength of the commercial fiscal revenues, restaurants been substituted for the food and beverage establishments that were defined. And this is a means of capturing the meal tax and the full fiscal revenues associated with that. Secondly, on VC number 3, commercial space and conditional uses, language was added to allow similar types of retail service establishments to be included in the conditional use category per the request of city staff. Thirdly, commercial space design requirements. The VC was clarified to ensure that all retail businesses fronting on West Broad and Northwest Streets have retail storefront entrances along those corridors. Thirdly, in VC number 3, the commercial space, the site-specific uses, there was some additional size of the movie theater had been adjusted to reflect the current lease and design, and that was actually a previous one. The VC number 3, commercial space guarantees on site-specific language has been changed to reflect that 50% of the total residential units, which equates to 197 versus 20 that was offered in the previous VC, can receive certificates of occupancy prior to the movie theater beginning their tenant improvements. Previously, this was tied in the back end to the final certificate of occupancy. Now the first 50% of the occupancies are tied to this, that 50% of the total residential units could be allowed based on the tenant improvements being in place. On VC number 3, commercial space, the site-specific uses commitment was added, stating that all commercial shell spaces will be completed in addition to having a minimum of 50% of the total commercial space will have tenant improvements underway prior to the issuance of the final certificate of occupancy. On VC number 6, affordable housing, a new provision has been added allowing the owner to make a cash contribution to the city upon the annual anniversary of the issuance of the first certificate of occupancy versus upfront and then at the 20-year mark. VC number 7, pedestrian-oriented design elements regarding streetscape. Language was added to reflect the design would be in accordance with the city's adopted streetscape standards for commercial spaces, which is our latest version of that, and that deviation from the 10-foot clear sidewalk can only occur where outdoor dining is located in the immediate vicinity, and then the limit is down to 6 feet. That's the minimum. In regard to VC number 7, pedestrian-oriented design elements, pedestrian improvements, the commitment to provide a new pedestrian crosswalk in Median Island on the intersection of Northwest Street and Grove Avenue has been added now as a condition subject to the approval of the City Council and the City Manager. The applicant and the engineers, in addition to members of staff, believe that such a crosswalk is not necessarily safe, and we recommend that this be included and subject to a post-development study. In regard to that, VC number 17, the total contribution to post-development studies in terms of traffic and associated improvements in the neighborhoods in the adjacent streets, there was a $50,000 funding for that. That's been increased by $25,000 in relation to the Grove Avenue crosswalk improvements, and so that would be studied along with that, and additional monies available in the instance that that was implemented for improvements as well. It also could be done at the time of site plan, and the crosswalk could be included at that level. VC number 8, environmental improvements regarding future solar panels. A commitment was provided for the installation of solar panels in the future, and a commitment to providing conduit space for equipment in the main electrical room that had been requested. VC number 11, Stormwater and Sanitary Sewer Fund. This is what I alluded to when we were talking about the updated August 10th VCs that you received on desk tonight, and the additional 10,000. Well, there was an additional financial contribution that amounted to 10,000 was added to the stormwater fund where none existed for this purpose of tree canopy. VC number 17 was post-development studies that I talked about, and lastly was under VC number 24, under terms and conditions, the expiration of the special exception has been revised to 12 months after the date of approval from 36 months. And that's 6 months earlier now. It was from 18 months and from approximately now and now. So it was before August 2019 that they're committing to. So they've shortened that time frame in which they're committed to starting this project. And that was a 3-year requirement, which was set to expire in 2019. Now, by August 2019, they'll have started the project. So they've closed the gap on that as well. In regard to the additional staff comments, the staff had talked about, and the council as well has indicated they were looking for some additional improvements in the architectural elements associated with the facades and architectural renderings of the building. The applicant is expected to provide some updates tonight on that. And then secondly was the Grove Avenue crosswalk, which I've already discussed. Just of note, the site plan is well advanced on this project. It is subject to Planning Commission public hearing and final actions, and subject to action tonight on the special exception. In anticipation, the Planning Commission could take final action on this in September. Then just as a final note, the estimated fiscal impact is $1.7 million to $2.1 million for this project. As a final administrative note, in regard to the motion, to move to adopt TR 1832, I would add to that, subject to the updated voluntary concession, or VCs, dated August 10th. At this point, the staff report and the resolution notes on August 8th date, which was your package date. So if you could add that to that, that will make it clear that that gets changed throughout the document in the event. That's the staff report for the night. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Why don't I move forward with the developer's presentation, then we'll open up to questions of various persuasions. Welcome, thank you for coming back.
Thank you. Mayor Tarter, Vice Mayor Conley, members of council. My name is Sean Caldwell, Senior Managing Director of Mill Creek Residential. As much as this application amendment has been before the city for 18 months, this community, this development has been in front of the city for 4 years plus now. It's been what I can say, whether it's been 4 years, 18 months, or the past week since the work session, this development has improved, in my opinion at least, in every single aspect. Whether it be affordable housing in perpetuity, NGBS Gold for the age-restricted housing, improved architecture, which improved over the past week, our retail or contributions, even if a contribution is a single instead of a triple, there's been improvements over this time. I'd like to say that if the council does grant us approval tonight, that this victory would not be one of ours. It'd be really one of the 4 years that got us here. It'd be one of the community engagement that was fostered by your leadership, led by city staff, city manager, and the boards and commissions. It's along with our consultants of WDG, Walter Phillips and Wells. The collaboration of those people really put what's in front of you on paper in front of you today. Our legacy at Mill Creek, along with Spectrum, assuming it's approved, is really on the go-forward basis. It's really not only starting the construction, but how we build it, how we engage in the community, no different than hopefully we've engaged over the past 3 to 4 years. We understand that, first of all, construction is difficult, and we will make mistakes. How we respond to those mistakes, how we engage with the community in those instances, ultimately what we build and how the retail lives and the vibrancy of Founders Row on a Saturday night, that will be our legacy. So tonight while we have a very deep presentation in PowerPoint, we're focused strictly on the changes that have happened since the work session. My colleague Joe Muffler will present those changes, and as questions arrive that go beyond just the changes, we're prepared to present them. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Joe Muffler.
Thanks, Sean, and I just want to start off by echoing his sentiments, thanking the council members for all of your efforts over these last few months, these last few years as well, along with the extensive efforts of city staff, the boards and commissions, and then of course the neighbors and citizens who we've had the opportunity to engage with. We've had probably 15, 20 presentations since May. I'd like to think, and I'd like to say as we go through this, that we have learned something, we have taken something from each of those meetings and done our best to implement it to result in a project that I think is without doubt better than it was in May. And we're proud of what we can show you tonight and hope that you all as a city will be proud of it too one day when it looks better than it does in these renderings that we show you here tonight. So Gary did a fantastic job of going through the VC changes, which was really the bulk of my presentation. I have an extensive deck that mirrors very similarly what you saw last week. I don't plan on showing those slides unless necessary, but they are there for questions. So just to briefly touch on the updates from last week that Gary went through as well, I want to hit on the bold ones are what you see or what has changed. Gary went through all of them, but just to touch on a couple, just to provide a little bit more color from the developer's perspective. The Section 3 ones that are right here that pertain to the site-specific uses, this was a concern of staff and of the city, one that we want to express our complete alignment with, and that is the delivery of successful retail with the residential. Again, we will be the developer and the owner of this entire project. This project does not succeed without successful retail. And to demonstrate that we're not simply going to shunt away the retail or market it heavily in lieu of residential, we have done our best to tie delivery of residential certificates of occupancy to the retail shell and retail tenant improvements. So that's what this signifies. Like Gary said, rather than tie the movie theater improvements to the very end of the project, we're now tying it to the very middle of the project, which is essentially where it comes around in the phasing of construction. Furthermore, we've added a commitment to having 50% of the commercial space actually be under tenant improvements. So not simply to be the shell space, but to have tenant improvements in half of the retail prior to us receiving the final residential certificate of occupancy. Again, the affordable housing contribution was a request of council last week that we have added. The clarification of the outdoor dining space, the crosswalk, which I will touch on a little bit more here in a couple of minutes, along with what Gary said, the crosswalk financial contribution as well. We have the stormwater contribution for the tree canopy. Again, the contribution to the post-development traffic study and the revision of the special exception. So again, many of these were requests. The rest of them that I've gone through, we've already touched on, but that does not mean that they are not insignificant, such as the NGBS standards, the affordable housing perpetuity, and the rest of which we have talked about before. This is just a summary of the amended community benefits package. Again, we've added essentially $35,000 in some form or fashion. The post-development traffic study is pending what is decided by council and city manager on the crosswalk itself. And just a reminder of the rest of the benefits package, none of this has been changed since not just the last meeting, but many meetings before that for neighbors who have not seen it in a couple of weeks. Clarification on the housing language, which again, I believe we've touched on enough that hopefully we're all on the same page with. So this crosswalk, which has been a center of conversation, I'd like to amend maybe the sentiment the way I expressed this last week. We as the developer believe that there are 3 potential scenarios here that would be successful in some capacity. One is the crosswalk as presented here, which is simply you have a crosswalk further east and north on West in Park, and then further south at Broad and West. We believe that this is the safest, most constructive way to present a crosswalk at this situation, at this scenario, based on feedback from city staff's engineers and art engineers as well. The second means that again we have included in our original CDP and would be willing to commit to here as well, with additional safety measures, would be the installation of this crosswalk at Grove and Ave as it was presented. And again, that would be provided by Mill Creek. Lastly is an alternative, which would be a crosswalk adjacent to Wells Fargo. There are issues here with the geometry's intersection, all the traffic turning patterns, but it does reduce the sight distance issues that you saw in the video last week and that you see here today. What I would like to emphasize again is that Mill Creek, as the applicant, is willing to do any 3 of these scenarios. Furthermore, we have financial commitments to do one of these 3 scenarios, whether it is now or whether it is 4 years from now in a post-development sense. So we have the money in the voluntary concessions to construct it, which, having vetted through our subcontractors, we believe that with safety measures installed, including the blinking pedestrian signage, you're looking at an all-in cost of about $20,000 to install that sidewalk. Our financial contribution has been for $25,000 towards that, so to go from $50,000 to $75,000. Again, the way we have phrased this in the voluntary concessions is that we will simply follow the lead of City Council and the City Manager. We have heard from many neighbors who are both very for this and very against it, along with many council members, Planning Commission members who follow those same sentiments as well. We believe that walkability is a key component of the site. We believe that all 3 foster walkability. Whether, again, you're sending people north and south to these crosswalks or if you're installing one in some capacity right here. So I do want to touch on some architectural updates as well. Many of these will remain unchanged from last weekend with the grand exception of a key elevation that we talked on a lot last week. So southeast elevation, moving west on Broad Street. This is from the Architectural Advisory Board and the Planning Commission work session last month. This is where we are today. So we have dramatically increased that with cementitious and masonry. We have completely transformed it to be a more tower element with signage, or rather, identification, and it is all masonry and glazing now. We did see a question was, why is George Mason's face all over this building? It is strictly a placeholder. I can assure you of that. We are working through our branding. It will not be a face of anyone. So we are working through that branding right now. But this is just a close-up. It's very hard to tell on the TV. But again, there is a different color pattern on both sides of the brick so that there is some articulation, some detailing there. That's more for the audience's reference and council who saw this last week. Again, this was the elevation on Broad Street from the 521 hearing. We were asked by the AAB to break up the cornice work and the facade to create different building elements, which we believe we have achieved. We've eliminated a lot of the cementitious, replaced it with masonry as well. Finally, we had the elevation of the age-restricted building. We are in complete agreement with everyone that this is also the most prominent elevation on the building. And the concern had to do with the color of the brick and the cementitious panel being right there at a prominent elevation. So we have not changed the color design for the most part, but this is all now metal panels all the way up through the cornice work, which again has been elevated, so now there's just a cornice and there's a cap on it. I believe we have materials here that we can show you as well. So that is all metal panel. In addition to that being metal panel, this was the hotel from the special exception approval 2 years ago. This is where we were 2 months ago. This is where we are today with that corner being metal panel as well. Finally, coming inside the Market Square, the other 2 corners of this building have also been switched from cementitious to metal panel. So this building is metal panel now. Lastly, really in terms of prominent elevations, the Park Avenue one, again, these are the townhomes in various iterations. This is where we are today. There was, we have designed these to be cementitious, but we have taken into consideration how we can really amplify the cementitious to make it look like a prominent design with a board and batten pattern that we believe is dynamic, and that with the broken up cornice work creates a bay window, creates an effect that is really nice and juxtaposed with some of the rest of the building architecture as well. Again, another perspective from this angle before with the broken up cornice work to later. This is coming down Northwest Street so that you can all see what that perspective would look like as well. And then there was a question in terms of site angles. We had mentioned last week that someone standing on Park Avenue would not be able to see the top of the movie theater, and this is illustrative of that. And lastly, this is the last slide, is just the Grove Avenue, where again we had made architectural refinements for the last work session based on AAB feedback as well. So we are in the process of responding to all city staff review comments on our site plan, including the AAB. For Planning Commission's hearing on the 5th, we will be resubmitting tomorrow on that. So we received the comments last week. We're going to resubmit tomorrow so that this can stay on the timeline that we showed last week as well. That's all we have. I am more than happy to answer any questions. And again, thank you all for your time. We do have our consultants here as well that can provide some further detail.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate the refinements you've made to your design and look forward to discussing them. Before we do have some folks in the public who wanted to speak, and we'll just go ahead and take those right now so we can incorporate some of their comments into questions we might ask. And I would say if there's anyone in the public who has not filled out a speaker slip who does want to speak tonight, you're certainly welcome to do so, but I would ask at this time that you go ahead and fill out a speaker slip, submit it to the clerk, and she'll bring it on over to me and you can speak. Again, if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes and state your name and address for the record. Our first speaker is Laura Gogol, followed by Mike Winters. Welcome.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the City Council. Appreciate the chance to talk with you. Would it be possible to pull up one of the views?
Sorry.
Thank you. Could you pull up the view that shows coming down from West Street? That one right there. That's great. So the first concern I have as you look at this is this piece right here. This little upshot right there. We worked really hard as a community to raise the concern about the height on Park Avenue side and sort of what we're going to see from the residential neighborhoods coming down that street. And I just still feel like when I look at that, my breath is sort of taken away by it. On the one hand, I'm very excited. I really do thank the developer and all the work that's gone into it. But I really think it's going to make a huge change in our neighborhood. In this part of Falls Church, and some things for the better. But it really is this massive new thing. And so we were trying to keep on the side, the Park Avenue side, it feeling just a little cozier. And I think that they've really achieved that with the townhome piece. But as you get to the corner there, it really starts to look much more like a high-rise building. And I don't really know why it needs to extend up in that height. I know that there's some issue about breaking up the architectural components and having it have some different elements, but I still really am concerned that seems to go up higher than I thought we had understood the development was going to be on that side of the project. I also echo the concerns that other people have raised just about the whole transition and buffering. It still feels very abrupt to me, especially once we realign the streets and the bike path, which I think needs to happen for the traffic. I just think it's going to be very stark. It's going to be very bare. It looks very bare to me coming into that. So I was hoping that more could be done about that, and that may be a site plan issue. I don't know when those issues get addressed. The other thing I've raised before, and I just reiterate again, I really think that the estimates on the number of school-aged children are inaccurate. Originally, when this project was proposed before, as you've heard, they were predicting a ratio of 0.33 children coming from the development based on the averages from the other apartment buildings, and now that's been reduced below that because I'm not sure. I know that there were various things that went into that calculation, but I just think that given the location where this is situated, right in the neighborhoods around the schools, it is the most neighborhood feeling of the buildings that are out there, like the Lincoln and Northgate and Pearson Square. All of those are in more commercial, industrial neighborhoods. This neighborhood is pretty much, on this side, just completely residential. So I think you're going to get a lot more school children than have been predicted, and that will change the financials, I think, significantly. And then I also I've been hearing from people in our neighborhood about the concern about the crosswalk, and I don't think everyone's come out where they need to come out, but I do think there needs to be continued engagement on that with the community to make sure that the community feels like it is walkable and isn't putting them at risk when they're trying to drive to their just around in this neighborhood, with having people darting across the street in places that are unpredictable, with the traffic getting worse. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out and for your thoughts. Mike Winters, followed by Rohini Winters.
Good evening. Mike Winters, 324 Grove Avenue. We'll talk about the crosswalk and specifically why a delay to post-development study and construction determination is ill-advised. There's been lots of talk on whether to have one. Well, we already have crosswalks there. Per VA Code 46.200, crosswalks exist wherever there are intersections that have connecting crosswalks on opposite sides. Grove is clearly a T intersection with sidewalks on all sides. So per 46.200, the crosswalks are there. They're just unmarked. If you dig into the Department of Transportation Traffic Engineering Division guidelines on installing crosswalks, it says there is no legal difference between marked and unmarked crosswalks at intersections. So they're there. Okay, we can't say whether we want one or don't want one. We have them. And name matters. If you call it a mid-block crosswalk, well, the crosswalk doesn't exist mid-block unless you put one there. Okay, it's just means between intersections. That's an intersection. Those crosswalks exist. There's no choice about that. So by sitting through the planning committee and the city council, we've acknowledged their safety concerns with that intersection. It's been going on a long time. But the developer, even though they showed some slides, didn't show what was on the bottom that said, we discourage a pedestrian crossing, no crosswalk is proposed, and we do not believe a crosswalk should be installed at this intersection. So that right now is the bottom line, and that is in attachment 10A28 to tonight's agenda. So I would be cautious. I know that there's a commitment to work forward, but right now they don't believe a crosswalk, which already exists, is advisable. So the question is not whether to have one, but how to make it safer and more functional. The bottom line, marking exists to make it more safe. But from the planning committee, we understood, as we saw on the slides, sight lines, treescape, hardscape, contours, cutouts, road width, sidewalk width. There's a lot to determine. So it makes no sense to delay the study till everything's built. Those trees are in place and then go, wait, we can't put it here. There's a tree there. There's a planter there. The curb doesn't offer enough width for a safe harbor. So the right time is now during site planning, which is what was proposed by the planning committee. Otherwise, you have to retrofit or compromise, and you can't get where you need. So the bottom line is the unmarked crosswalks at the T intersection of Grove Avenue and West Street need proper markings and other enhancement as necessary to improve safety. The right time to design this is during site planning, before new construction limits or otherwise complicates prudent choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Our next speaker is Rohini Winters. Welcome.
Thank you.
Rohini Winters, 324 Grove Avenue. I've spoken about Founders Row, previously Mason Row, a few times. Pretty much over the 85-foot height decision. I'm over subsidizing a business for incentivizing it to come in with a consumer sales tax on tickets. I'm over the lack of a terrace step back at Park Avenue. And I'm really even over the 17% commercial space that remains in the proposed project, because I think we've arrived at the best we can. And I really appreciate your patience, indulgence, having numerous town halls and council meetings on this subject. I hope that it works out for the city. But I do have several asks of you tonight. On the heels of what the tree commissioner asked for, I would like you to stipulate that the burning bushes on the WNOD trail remain. Anybody who thinks that those are invasive haven't seen the people go gangbusters in Illinois for burning bushes. There has been probably residents here much longer than my 10 or 15 years, but 40 years of cultivating the burning bushes. We all look forward to them turning red in the fall. So if we can keep those instead of a sidewalk, that makes more sense to me as a buffer to the WNOD trail than a hardscape. I would ask that you give the south-facing wall next to the St. James property some kind of architectural relief carving that reflects a landscape or the old train station or a waterfall, as we are kind of the gateway to what's to our west. I would ask that you disapprove all cementitious material on Park Avenue townhouse facades. I've seen them built and they look worse than on the picture. I don't think there's anything you can do to make cementitious material look better in real life. I would ask that you select the alternative crosswalk as proposed on slide 14 of tonight's presentation from the developer. Making the city walkable has been a cornerstone of the comprehensive plan, the Parks and Recreation chapter. Everything that we've done has been to connect our city with green spaces and walkable connections. And to not put out the welcome mat to the pedestrian lane of Founders Row just flies in the face of everything that I think we've talked about and worked for in this project and in our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Lisa Varoutsas, followed by Andrew Painter.
Hello, Lisa Varoutsas, 301 Grove Avenue. First, I want to say it's very hard to make informed comments when the latest documents are not available on the website the day of the council meeting. And then I hope you had a chance to read the email I sent earlier today that provided more detail than I can possibly provide in the 3 minutes allocated. Movie theater attendance is on the decline. Should the decline continue or the theater promise for this development fail to do as well as projected in the fiscal impact model, second anchor does not exist to offset the reduction in revenue. Our school system is well renowned. Parents may be willing to move into an apartment to get their children enrolled in the city's school system while they wait for a home they can afford to become available. As this development will have the most multifamily rental units of any project recently approved, the school contribution should be higher than the amount committed to by those other developments. The request to reduce the number of residential parking spaces by 24 is worrisome. Although a person does not have a vehicle when they sign a lease for a unit at Founders Row, there is nothing to preclude them from obtaining a vehicle while living there. The replacement of the hotel with a 72-unit active adult building may skew the parking requirement numbers. Most of the people I know who are over the age of 55 own at least one vehicle, and couples have 2 or more. The age group targeted for those units mean they could also be grandparents, which would imply the possibility of children and grandchildren visiting for overnight stays. Mill Creek has stated they will employ the use of valet parking during peak periods to ensure overflow parking does not occur on residential streets. What is a peak period? Is it only during the holiday season? What about when Market Square is activated for an event? Is that a peak period? Some of the internal on-street parking would be unavailable during events at the Market Square, indicating a need for additional space in the parking garage. The loss of green space and trees currently in existence at the residential sites being absorbed by this development, and the failure to commit to replacement of at least 1/2 of the 70 trees being removed for this project is disturbing for a city with a 40-year history as a Tree City USA. The city should be more resolute on insisting developments include more green space and not be built in such a way that they become mini heat islands. Despite staff's concern regarding the crosswalk proposed for direct access from Grove Avenue to Founders Row, I believe the inclusion of that crosswalk is well warranted. Many people will choose to cross at that location rather than walk the additional distance to one of the nearby controlled intersections. They do so today. Why would they not do so in the future? The skateboard area at West End Park gets a lot of use by both skaters and teens just hanging out, and the playground equipment is used regularly by people with young children. The trip to the spray ground at Founders Row after spending time at West End Park will be a quick walk by crossing at Grove Avenue. Should you vote to approve the amendment request, please include 2 stipulations. First, all road enhancements be completed, traffic lights installed, WNOD trail realigned across West Street, the new intersection, traffic calming measures on Grove Avenue, intersections not to be blocked clearly marked prior to the residential occupancy. The second, withholding of a substantial number of residential occupancy permits for both the age-restricted and multifamily units until all retail space is leased, a majority of the businesses are open, and the theater is active. The schedule currently shared by Councilwoman Hardy shows the first wave of residential occupancy will occur in November 2020, while the theater and businesses will not be open until the spring or summer of 2021. Thank you for listening. I hope you take my thoughts into consideration.
We will. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Andrew Painter. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tarter, Vice Mayor Connolly, members of council. My name is Andrew Painter. I reside at 2823 Marshall Street, Falls Church. I am a zoning attorney at the law firm of Walsh Colucci. I'm also chairman of the Falls Church Chambers Legislative Committee and a member of its board of directors. I want to start off before I get into Founders Row, just say real quick, we do look forward to working with Welcome America and the group that was here earlier tonight. It's a wonderful organization. As concerns Founders Row, we submitted a July 11th letter. We do support the Founders Row project. We encourage you all to support it as well. This has been a long and difficult and candidly divisive project for our organization. As some of you all know, the Chamber has lost several valued members because of its support for the proposed development. And the city itself has lost several popular businesses which have either closed or relocated out of our corporate limits. Still, though, what we're here tonight for is to consider a change. We're not dealing with whether or not the project should happen. It is a change to the project. And with that in mind, we do believe it will contribute significantly to the city's tax revenue. It will become a commercial destination for the west end of Falls Church. It will bring environmental benefits, including upgrades to stormwater management, as well as LEED certification. And it will provide significant voluntary concessions, including capital contributions for schools, parks and rec, and the library, as well as affordable housing, public art, and art space. We also believe that the age-restricted and other apartments that will be associated with the project will help drive foot traffic for businesses as well as volunteers for nonprofit organizations. We do believe in the promise of a movie theater, that it will attract regional people from throughout the region and make this a destination. And the planned Market Square that's going to be at the center of the community will become an important entertainment and event hub. We do have a couple caveats, though. We urge the developer to make every effort to minimize construction issues with the neighbors. We do support connectivity, pedestrian connectivity in particular, to other areas of the city. We would like the developer to consider parking technology to ease congestion, as well as seek independent businesses for consideration for filling up the commercial space. We would also ask them to collaborate with local entities like Falls Church Arts and VPIS and the Chamber to educate residents on programming and local activities and efforts. Founders Row, at its essence, is an exciting project for the developer or for the community. We do commend Mill Creek. We think that their fully integrated business model makes them an exceptional partner for the city. And on behalf of the entire Chamber of Commerce, I do ask your approval of the project for the benefit of our local businesses and our community at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your recent recognition, your legal recognition. Anyway, our next last speaker is Steve Miller. While he's coming up, if there's anyone else who would like to speak, this is your opportunity. All right, this is our last speaker. Welcome.
Last but not least. So Steve Miller, 1005 Jennifer Lane. In the staff comments in attachment 16, they use American Community Survey 2015 data to justify the residential parking component. I'd like to update that analysis to be the most recent 2016 data. In addition, I'd like to look at a more granular look at that data, to look at parts of the city, because I think that's important. In addition, I'd like to expand it beyond just parking to also look at student ratios, okay? Just as a comment, when I talk about households or units, just for the purposes of discussion in 3 minutes, I'm always referring to renter-occupied units, okay? That's just like the staff report did. Just as background, the American Community Survey, or what I'll call ACS, is the Census Bureau's replacement of the decennial long-form data, so that now communities such as ours throughout the decade can get information to make planning decisions such as we're looking at tonight. The Census Bureau actually defines the city up into 3 census tracts, an eastern section, and what I'll call an eastern section, a northwestern section, a southwestern section. East is everything east of West Broad Street. West of West Broad Street, everything is east of Washington Street, excuse me. And the 2 sections west of Washington Street, the northern part is what I'll call the northwest part is north of West Broad Street, and the southwest part is south of that. Founders Row would be part of the northwestern section. Let me talk about student ratios first, because I want to make sure I get to that. The American Community Survey has a question that says, are there children under the age of 18 in the household? Okay, so that's an incidence rate of occurrence of school-age children. Overall for the city, the percentage is 24%. For the eastern part of the city, it's also 24%. For the southwest part of the city, which, just a comment, is where 301 West Broad as well as Tinner Hill is located, that's the lowest student population percentage in the city, which is 22%. And the northwest section, which is where Founders Row is 36%. Now, the important thing here is that incidence rate actually informs you about what the student ratio might be, because the incidence rate is always going to be lower, is going to be a lower bound over what the student rate would be. So this data would indicate that for the area that Founders Row is going into, we should be looking at a student ratio of 0.36 or higher rather than 0.33 and going below that. So the question is, why would that be? It's because that section of the city is really closest to the schools. As a matter of fact, if you haven't done this exercise, pull out a compass if any of you still have that. Put the center of it at Founders Row and stretch it out about 0.6 of a mile. You'll cross through Mary Ellen Anderson, George Mason, Mount Daniel, excuse me, as well as Thomas Jefferson. So this project is uniquely centered in a part of the city which is most kid-centric, okay? So with that in mind, well, okay, let me just finish. You're looking at building the largest apartment complex in the city in a part of the city which has the highest student density. And so I think I urge you to consider looking at the financials for a ratio of 0.36 or higher. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And unless there are any other speakers, the public comment portion of this hearing is now closed. Why don't we move now to questions from council members for either the staff or the developer? Are there any questions? Mr. Z.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to address my comments primarily to the financial aspects of this thing, and on the staff report at lines 528, we have the chart that shows the financial impact, and it's a lot of people are perhaps don't have availability to the data that the EDA office does. It appears that we are now with more residential units actually and less commercial able to claim an increase in our net revenue. We just heard from a citizen that said even the prior 0.33 pupils is too low. We are using a lower number, and I would like to perhaps hear from the director of the Economic Development Office to go over again why the ratio has changed over time. It just doesn't hurt to talk about that again.
Good evening, Council. So there are three basic changes that have been made to the fiscals run for this project as compared to late 2015. And you have mentioned a chart that we have handed out that is entitled Comparing Founders Row Net Annual Fiscal Impact Variable and Results. So this kind of follows the progression since 2015. So by far the largest difference in the latest net annual fiscal impact results is caused by a shift in the pupil projection methodology we are now using. This shift came about when we recognized that we now have 509 new occupied similar unit type and mix of apartments in the 301 West Broad and Lincoln projects. And there are 46 pupils in those 509 units as of November 2017 for an overall pupil ratio of 0.09. So we realized that using the prior 0.33 pupils per unit methodology for the low fiscal impact result was just too high compared to that 0.09 actual result. In fact, more than 3 times that result. So we decided that to more accurately project pupil numbers and expenses, we had to adjust the way in which we calculated that lower annual fiscal impact result. So starting with the Insight projections and now with the Founders Row projections, our baseline pupil projection method stayed the same as it has been done for the last many projects. The baseline projection is based on the annual Falls Church City Public Schools enrollment data that provides us with the actual annual pupil ratios per unit types in all of the 869 units in Pearson Square, Reed Building, Northgate, 301 West Broad, and the Lincoln project. Based on those model ratio inputs and the unit counts, that pupil projection is now 43 pupils and yields the higher 2.1 million net annual fiscal impact result per year for this project. But here's where the change comes in. We now take those 43 baseline pupils and we artificially inflate that number by 50%. So we add on an additional 21.5 pupils to end up with a higher pupil projection result of 64.5 pupils. So the range for this project is now 43 to 64.5 pupils. The net annual fiscal impact result from that lower net annual fiscal impact calculation, including those 64.5 projected pupils, is 1.8 million. Then the other 2 changes that I'll just talk to briefly that are changes since 2015 is that we added $125,000 to $140,000 in additional theater meals and sales taxes. Because the 2015 results, since we had the 2015 results, we've done a lot more research. We were previously extremely conservative in our projections for those numbers. We now also have a higher theater seat count. It was previously 400 to 800 seats. It's now 750 to 850 seats. We know the operator is Studio Movie Grill, and we know that they will also have a 2,000 square foot bar/lounge and a full service kitchen within the theater. And we've had consultant help in evaluating these numbers as well. And then finally, the developer added 5,000 additional square feet of restaurant space to their voluntary concessions, so that's an additional $120,000 per year in meals and sales taxes. So that's kind of a brief overview of the changes over time.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that. So are you then saying, so let me try to frame the question in a way that brings together all the other things that we've heard, that the higher pupil ratio was based on an estimate perhaps derived as a hybrid of the Weldon Cooper estimates?
You're referring to the 0.33?
Yes.
That number actually came from all of the multifamily units in the entire city. It's actually a much lower number today than it was. So that would include Oakwood, Merrill House, all of the units across the entire city. The actual number today for all of the units is 0.27. It was back in 2015, 0.33.
Okay, and then just to follow up on that then, are we then to conclude that reliance on the granularity of actual reality-filled units, 100% occupancy, history of time in those units is preferable in terms of the city's malls than an estimate derived by a consultant company that does estimates for the entire state?
You know, I think we've, just learned over the progression of these projects how important unit types are. For instance, this project as well as the last several have been 70% fewer than 2-bedroom projects, where at Pearson Square we know there's a very different unit mix. The pupil ratios have gone down now that we've mixed in the Lincoln and the 301 West Broad numbers. So there are a lot of different variables that have gone into those lower pupil projections that just over time have evolved.
Okay, and then finally, the use of the census data. And I presume that's a little bit old at this point, but and I don't necessarily subscribe to the theory that the locus of this arc would tend to drive people to populate this project per se. But how do we discuss the census reporting in the context of this project?
I think we'd have to look at it more carefully. I wondered if the concentration of single-family detached homes in that particular area was perhaps higher than down where Lincoln and 301 West Broad might be. I mean, there are many factors that might have gone into the concentration being higher in this particular area. I'd request maybe some additional time to look at that if you'd like that to be.
Right. Well, I certainly
Varied.
think that having real live data with real people and real units that we can say are comparable is kind of where I would place my bet as well.
Right.
And I thank you for that
You're very welcome.
treatment of the information.
Sure.
Just to have a couple more things here, because a lot of time's been spent on talking about where we put the pedestrian crosswalk and the WIT would probably suggest that we cross-stripe the entire intersection and let people figure it out for themselves. I'm not going to suggest that. I think to me it makes a lot of sense to see where the traffic patterns are by walkers as we near completion. It's what they do in universities. They used to put pathways from different buildings hoping that students will walk there, and it turns out that students will walk where students will walk. So now what they do is they leave it all grass, and they only pave the parts that have turned to mud. I think that works here as well. With regard to the cementitious, fiber cement is a product that's completely neutral. It can be done well, and I think in this case that we've gone through extraordinary measures with board and batten applications and other kinds of things to make it look like a material that can become part of the art. St. James facade, I understand, is going to be treated to an outdoor mural, the first of its kind, and I'm sure that's going to be an object of fascination for this community. I've got my own ideas about what it looks like, but I'm not going to express them tonight. Finally, the issue of the burning bushes. I'm not a fan of burning bushes. We've put them in our backyards and we've torn them out. But if someone likes the burning bushes enough, and maybe the Falls Church News Press can dedicate a specific survey on burning bushes. I'm looking at the plans that were submitted before, and it wouldn't seem to be such an extraordinary change. And perhaps you could just mix in the bushes with trees as well. So I think that that's a minor ask. Just take another look at that, if you will. Thank you.
All right, who's next? Ms. Hardy.
Great, thank you. I promise I'll be quicker tonight than I was at the last work session. So on the popular crosswalk or no crosswalk, I think I read in the staff report that there was a median proposed, but I don't remember any discussion about it. Is that part of the plan, not part of the plan?
Yeah. So there would be a pedestrian refuge as of the original approved location. there would not be room for it at the alternative proposed location, which is one of the reasons it does minimize the site distances, but it doesn't meet all of the, requirements or safety features that you would like to have in that location. So.
Got it. I think I mentioned at kind of work session that I personally think that having a study also would be most prudent, just so we actually see actual traffic patterns and how people are using the site. But I think one of the understandable concerns from the community is how do we ensure we'll do it? So in the past, we told people we're going to get to it later, but how do we make sure that the traffic study will happen? And then if we deem that we do need it, how do we ensure that we will actually follow through on it?
Well, the bottom line is that it needs to be safe. And so let me just point to two places where this issue shows up in the voluntary concessions. And these are the changes that have occurred over the last week, and I appreciate Mill Creek working with us on it. So point number one is that on page 10 of the VCs, there is new language that says installation of a pedestrian crosswalk, including median island for refuge across Northwest Street at the Grove Avenue intersection, will be installed by the developer, subject to city manager approval. And saying city manager approval, what that really is just sort of the catch-all phrase for the staff review of the process. So that's the commitment of the developer, but we need to not be disingenuous about it. The city engineer has reviewed it and will not approve it as designed. And that is the professional view of it. And I think there's a concurrence with Walter Phillips on that. So that's where it lies today. We'll go through site plan. There may be some alterations that the engineering folks that we depend on for their safety review will say, okay, actually, we've made some changes. This is going to work. In which case, the developer will install it, and we'll evaluate it once it's built. But that's what the voluntary concessions stand for. In addition to that, there was the increase for the post-traffic study and for improvements following that study, and that increase was for $25,000. Your question was, what's the guarantee that we're going to do it? The guarantee is we will do the study. I cannot guarantee that we will install the crosswalk because, again, we'll have the same issue, that the engineer will need to review it for safety. But the commitment is there. We will do the study. We'll look at it. If it's not installed when constructed, and we'll evaluate it, and we'll use these funds to do so.
I'm okay with that. One of the written comments we had gotten, I believe, was about adding an exclusion for vape stores in addition to illicit drugs. So while vaping is not illegal, I thought it was actually a good idea. So I want to see whether we can make it on the dais red line if you all are amenable to that.
So what I can say is that one of the prohibited uses when I heard that, so we do have currently in there facilities for the sale of paraphernalia for use with illicit drugs is prohibited. So vapes, I think, technically could be used as paraphernalia for illicit drugs. I'm not a big vapor myself, so I don't know, but I think you could do something with it. So I don't have any opposition to the vape store specifically. I think that was kind of the catch-all for it, though, was that facility for the sale of paraphernalia. So.
Generally, it's not illegal. I don't do it myself, but I hear that it generally is okay. So if we're okay adding that, if we can just make that a note that we're adding that, and we can work out the language after the fact? Or do we need to do it now? I'm looking at the city attorney. I don't know the proper word other than vaping store.
Let us think about that, and hopefully we can get something ready by the time you're making a motion.
Okay. So I don't have an opinion on burning bushes or any other type of vegetation. My concern is actually the sidewalk. And based on what I think Mr. Z said when he looked at the plans and my review of them, I don't think keeping the burning bushes is not mutually exclusive with the sidewalk that's proposed. Is that correct?
So it may be, well.
I don't believe it is. Antoinette, you can.
I think the existing ones need to come out, but we were proposing new ones until they were called out to be invasive.
Correct. So let me come up here and say that again. We just ended up removing the burning bushes because it was recommended by the Tree Commission, I believe. One of the commissions heavily recommended that they be removed because they were considered invasive species. So we removed them.
So the new sidewalk, in order to put that into Northwest Street, we would have to remove the existing ones that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were originally proposing to replace them behind the sidewalk to keep that screening, but we are asked to remove them since they are invasive.
And replacing them with this, but replacing them with a different kind of non-invasive species.
For screening.
Okay. Yeah. I'll ask that you just follow up with kind of our folks on the tree commission or the community on
Sure.
the type
Yeah,
of
we took
plant
our lead from the
or-
tree commission on that one.
Okay. Public art, I think someone had cited this already. We're glad that there will be kind of prominent public art on the church-facing side. Is that a site plan kind of review process, or how do we don't have a current public art policy in the city yet?
I believe we're treating it as a post-site plan amendment. Staff would have to speak to kind of the logistics behind that. But in order to engage the public, we wanted to treat it as a post-site plan amendment.
So at this time, we've scheduled the St. James mural side. That'll be a community process, and so we'd have a planner lead that with the applicants team. We go out to the community and work through that, and we could add the public art to that just as easy. We could have one process, so we're addressing all of that.
Great, that sounds good.
And
to
that would
me.
be a site plan amendment, post-site plan,
And
because
something
it's-
that needs like the city's approval before you move forward.
yeah, in other words, the planning commission would have the authority to grant final approval on that and review that, and we'd have a public hearing associated with that.
Okay. And then post-construction, two things I jotted down just from citizen comments and reading the VCs. So I think we've committed to permit parking on Park Avenue, and then I think we heard a request from the Steeples Court Homeowners Association about kind of striping or some kind of not blocking Northwest Street for their entrance. How do we ensure that those kind of post-construction things happen?
I think that could be part of the the traffic study that happens afterwards. If there's, so it is not currently in the site plan, or it's not in the city's plans to have, for instance, at Steeples Court, have a big don't block the box painting there. But I think those would be the types of things that would be looked at in that post-development traffic study, and then we'd have funds to implement them if they're needed.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I don't need to know the specifics how to do it. I think I just want to make sure that we have mechanisms in the process so that after projects are done, that we follow up on things that we said we were going to do. Because by the time it's done, it's 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm being told by my.
Up here.
I'm sorry. I'm being told by my civil engineer we do have striping in our plans to not block that intersection.
Oh,
so
we do.
that's
That's well, don't block the box.
there's striping.
Okay, that's great. And then just a quick comment for staff. So I really appreciate not only the detailed staff report, but actually having our comments noted and the status of kind of where we are with negotiation, because it's very satisfying to me knowing that my comments don't go into the ether. Just a small request for next time. I'm sure the boards and commissions would appreciate that sort of care as well. I know often they spend a lot of time in their meetings making comments, so it'd be nice if either the staff liaison or someone could get back to them, letting them know that, hey, here's a status of all your comments. We've taken these ones or we haven't, and various reasons, just to close the loop. But thank you.
All right, who's next? Mr. Duncan.
Just a couple of things. I don't want to dwell on the crosswalk because I don't think we're going to solve that tonight, and it'll evolve. But I did want to ask. So the Burning Bushes area there, the sidewalk a new sidewalk's going to be built there, and when we get past the Burning Bushes, whether they're there or gone, where does that sidewalk go? Does it just end, or does it turn into Grove Avenue, or what does it do?
So that new sidewalk, it's shown up on that site plan. It's north of the bushes. So that sidewalk connects Grove Avenue up to Weston Park. Just to be clear, there are bushes there that will act as a buffer. They were burning bushes. We were told to remove burning bushes and plant a non-invasive species. So it's can't remember, Antoinette, is it the planting then the sidewalk, or the sidewalk and then the planting? Sidewalk then planting. That planting just isn't burning bush. But the sidewalk is there. Currently there isn't a sidewalk. It will be built on whatever side of Grove that is, the north side, and connect up to West. So that other crosswalk that will remain has access from there as well.
All right. So if you're coming off Grove Avenue, the idea is you're going to come around to the left and on that new sidewalk, and then you're going to walk up there and you're going to cross.
Yeah.
Or
you could cross there and obviously come
Or you
south.
cross before you get to the intersection at the bike trail, and you walk down and then come down next to the bank and walk across. Okay, well, I think probably of all the people in the room, I've been jaywalking at that intersection longer than anybody, because we bought our house on Southwest Street just about 200 yards down, 1985, before the Metro opened. And when it opened in 86, we walked to Grove Avenue, via Grove Avenue to the Metro and back every day for years, and you know, people are just going to cross there if it seems safe. And I just say that now because that's my opinion. I mean, I hear what the traffic engineers see and measure, and I guess I would just ask citizens on all sides of this issue to let's just get the thing started. Let's build it, you know, to the degree that we can, and see how the area works, see how things look. You know, we've got a mechanism to, you know, discuss and council to decide, as I understand it, whether we put a crosswalk in, and we will not neglect this issue, I'm sure. Okay, enough about that. Just a word or two about net fiscal impact. So, Ms. Winters wrote us a note with a fiscal impact model from a city in California, which I confess I did not read the 10 screenfuls of information, but it seemed even more granular than our model, which by all reputation is one of the most granular fiscal impact models around. So I would just say, I mean, I'm very comfortable with where the numbers are now that Ms. Woodsman explained, because they're based on actual, real, you know, experience in buildings here in the city, and I think they've been, you know, cushioned with an inflated number that, you know, gives us even more protection. But I would say, you know, we're always looking to improve our net fiscal impact model, and if this process, you know, has brought to our attention another place that has an even better model than ours, then, you know, going forward, I certainly would want the Economic Development Committee to take a look at that, and we will. I would also, I'm interested in the notion that people buy a place to live or choose a place to live, rent or buy a place to live in the city based on its proximity to a school. That's actually a novel concept to me. I've never heard or thought about that. I guess because they're so small, you know, all the schools are pretty close by. So I would, again, similarly like to kick that around with some people in town who, you know, sell houses. We have a pretty active cadre of real estate agents, and just find out, you know, whether that is true in their experience, or if in fact people are just glad to find any house in the city and buy it no matter where it is, because they want to get into the City of Falls Church, which is sort of more my impression. And yeah, the nature of the houses in the northwest quadrant that's referred to in the ACS, you know, maybe it's because in the part of town where I live, the houses are generally a little smaller, generally a little more affordable for young families. I don't know, but I'm certainly happy to look into that a little bit further down the road a ways. I think that's about all I would like to say. Oh, parking, sorry. So, Mr. Shields, could you go through sort of the process of this permit parking approach that we're going to use, similarly to the way you explained how we're going to consider the sidewalk? Could you explain the timing and frequency, sequencing of the parking restrictions in the neighborhood?
So for Park Avenue, there's been extensive discussion of this and petitions received, formal petitions received requesting residential parking. And in the discussion with that neighborhood, the intention is to have a resident parking regime in place prior to construction. For Grove Avenue, we've not received a similar petition, but we will engage with Grove Avenue, or that I'm aware of. The intention is to have that discussion with the neighborhood. And that discussion is important because parking regulations are a burden on the homeowner. Not everybody is for them. And so we want to do that in a collaborative way, but we're committed to working with the Grove Avenue neighborhood to consider residential parking regulations for that street. For People's Court, that had not been kind of on my radar screen, but we could have that discussion with them as well.
The only other thought, thank you to everybody who's been involved, staff, Mr. Fuller, Ms. Ruzzi, applicant, the Mill Creek team, the Spectrum team, all boards and commissions, all the citizens, You know, it's a big thing we're doing here. We're aware of that. I do agree with what was said earlier, which is that the project has improved at every step because of the engagement. And I've almost uniformly, as far as I can recall, at all the boards and commission meetings that I've been to, and certainly in our discussions here on council and at the planning commission, been impressed with how civil and substantive and constructive people have been, even those who are, you know, most strenuously for this and those who are most adamantly opposed to it. I think it's been a good example of civic engagement yielding an outcome that hopefully will benefit the entire community. Thanks.
All right, who's next? Vice Mayor Connolly.
Luckily, everything Ms. Hardy said I had written down to talk about, from vape stores to the public comment. But the thing about the public comment, Mr. Shields, that Ms. Hardy just mentioned, I think is really important, that this document that was put together by staff with all of the public comment in it, and it's sorted and divided different ways, makes it so easy to understand everything the boards and commissions said. So I would request that once this project is done, and every project actually, once this vote is taken, there's a report that goes back to those boards and commissions with this that says, thank you for your comment, this is the result, and we make that an official part of the process. And that can either be through the staff liaison or as a general message from the city council, but just as a way to close the loop, as Ms. Hardy said, to make sure that people know that they're being heard, because I think that's really important. I'm wondering if we can go back, I think it's slide 13 from the PowerPoint, just to take a look at the changes in the voluntary concession amounts. It was right before the crosswalk.
Mm-hmm. That
one right there.
Yeah.
So we have the approved benefits package and the amended benefit package.
Mm-hmm.
And as I look at that, I'm wondering why the school contribution went down as opposed to up.
It's
when everything else went up.
It's based on the residential square footage, and just
Right.
the residential square footage shrunk a little bit because it doesn't include the age-restricted households
Had we
as well.
been counting the hotel as part of the school contribution?
It just has to do with the way the design evolved. That some of the buildings shrunk, some of the square footage shrunk, which is what's been reflected in the fiscal impact model as well.
Okay.
But it's been the same amounts, 524 a square foot.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. And then the slide that Ms. Gogol pointed at with the tall tower.
Oh,
if you just
sure,
go up
sure,
a little
sure.
further. Right, with George Mason there.
And now is this
looking at
one
Street.
right here.
That one right there.
Yes, ma'am.
So I know you said that George Mason there is a placeholder.
Correct.
Because he could be seen from everywhere.
Correct.
So those placeholders will also be part of the same public art discussion that Mr. Fuller just spoke about.
So that is more, I think that is more in line with our building signage package, our comprehensive building signage package, which I would honestly have to defer to staff in terms of how we handle that. That's a public process.
Okay.
And how you all have done that on other projects with their building signage. So we would consider that a building identifier, just so that, like you said, and that's one of the reasons for the height of that element and various other tower elements is from major entrances. We want people to be able to see, oh, that's Founders Row up there. That's
Right.
where we're going.
Okay. She is right, though, that kind of does stand up a bit higher than everything else. So I don't know if there's a way to, how that works as you're going through site plan. Yeah.
I'm sorry, say
Do
that
you know,
again?
what is this? What's in that tower? Is it the elevator?
Nothing.
Or?
Above that, there might be an elevator overrunning that. I don't think so. I think it's just a defining element. That is an entrance to Founders Avenue, right? So we want to make sure it's a defining element.
Right.
You kind of said it, that you can see it. So that when you're driving, we've had people express concerns, hey, how do we know that this is Founders Row? How do we know there's a movie theater in there?
Right.
You want that distinguishing
Could that
factor.
not be mechanical screen or the end of a stairwell, access to the roof?
I honestly believe it's just an architectural detail.
Okay.
And then the third person that spoke tonight was Mr. Morrison, and one of the things he said encouraged a continuing dialogue, and I think that's really important, just because we have public art that we're still talking about, the buffer zone, what's going to happen with Steeples Court, the curve on the WNOD trail. I think that's not really up to us because that's the WNOD trail, but a way to calm traffic there is an interesting thing that we hadn't heard before, but I think that is something that we should continue to address. And I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Mr. Snyder?
Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody involved. Thanks to the citizens, staff, certainly the developers, for a lot of work that's gone in here, literally thousands of hours. So thank you to everyone. Last week during the work session, I spent a lot of time probing the finances, probing the VCs, transportation issues and others. So I'm going to be relatively brief tonight. There are a couple points I want to make. I think first of all, at least in part in response to that, I think the VCs have gotten a lot better in terms of the guarantees of the commercial. And I specifically want to call that out. VCs number 3 and 5, I think, are a dramatic improvement over what we saw before. And I think we've really broken some new ground in terms of assuring the commercial development will come along at an early stage, because the financial elements of this are based upon that commercial performing. The transportation issues, I view them as sort of interlinked at this point with next steps and the Planning Commission. And I'm hoping that between now and the Planning Commission, number one, a procedural request. Could the developer meet with the community? Because some of this material is new. And I think a key part of that are all these transportation elements, the crosswalk, the Steeples Court, how we're going to manage the flow of vehicles when we have events and even in the normal course of the retail. So can you tell me a little bit about what your plan is to reach out to the community between now and the Planning Commission review? Because a lot of these can be addressed at the site plan process, and hopefully as many as possible.
Sure.
Because I think the sense is that after the site plan is approved, there's no doubt that your goodwill would be there, but I think that the city's ability to assure and guarantee things tends to be reduced at that point. So could you tell me a little bit about what you plan to do between now and the Planning Commission?
Absolutely. Again, we plan on, after tonight, resubmitting our site plan to the city with a comprehensive response to all the reviews that we have received at this point in time. To be transparent, that site plan will not have a crosswalk in there unless it is advised otherwise, either through the city manager, via you all. Our plan post-construction, as memorialized, and that's what I was looking up in here, VC 21 does have its designated community liaison to meet with the neighbors throughout the construction process, and then 2 years afterwards to address things post-traffic afterwards, et cetera. I am happy to meet with neighbors to discuss the crosswalk more, if need be. I'm not sure what additional detail or color I could add that, honestly, we haven't brought up thus far.
I think it's a bit broader than that.
Okay.
It's a lot in this VC's package is new. I think at least one community member has said, we really haven't had a chance to see this and react to it. My sense is that a lot or most, if pretty close to all of the questions would relate to site planning type issues and transportation planning type issues. So it seems to me reaching out to the neighborhood between now and the Planning Commission would be a very important thing to do. So I would urge you to do that.
I appreciate that. And what I will do is I will work with the city manager to create maybe a smaller format town hall that's just specific on VC updates, where people can come and we can sit down casually and we can discuss the updates after they've had a chance to review. I know that this last week's presentation, I believe, was posted, but otherwise we'll get that posted so that they can review it, I think, in a little bit more granular detail. But I'll work on getting something arranged. Before the
Okay, great. Thank you for that. The Tree Commission, and this is a request, if you can see your way clear to addressing some of the vegetation issues perhaps more fulsomely than you've been able to do so far, including additional resources, that would be very helpful, I think. I think So you can tell we take our trees very seriously until they fall down, and we take them very seriously for another reason. But we do consider them a key element of the community. So there's that. A question that hasn't been asked by others. Sprinklers, fire protection elements of the building, can you quickly summarize that to me? What will be where? Or maybe not so
You're
quick.
challenging me here. What I can assure you is that we have met the public safety requirements working with your chief building official and the fire marshal to ensure that this building not only meets mid-rise code, but honestly has some high-rise code elements as well, including a dedicated fire control center, fire command center that is typical of a high-rise package. The wood framing, and Sean is actually better at this than I am, but it is 3A fire-treated wood, so that there are different classes of wood. And this one is essentially it doesn't burn as fast in a fire, so it's a higher treated.
I'm thinking more of sprinklering, whether you've done that, if so, which floors and that kind of thing. We can address that later.
Every floor, every unit will be sprinklered according to code, and that will be reviewed by the chief building official and the fire marshal throughout. But we will have a fire sprinkler subcontractor who will create a design, and that will be in every unit.
Okay, I'll probably want to follow up with you.
That's fine, and I'm sorry I don't have specific answer on that.
That's fair enough. I always had to ask one question, and I knew whatever. So, let's see. So again, I think between now and the Planning Commission site plan review, and this is a request I'd make of the transportation experts and city staff, that we really work hard on how much of this can we assure the neighborhood at this point, as opposed to just saying, well, we'll do a study later and we'll take care of it later. And then I talked about the vegetation elements as well. One area that I'm not going to comment on is public art. It's probably a good thing, so I'll not be commenting on that. I think that's what I had, and thanks again. I will be needing to abstain on the final vote again, because two key members of your team are people that my family members are employing on something else, so they're going the regular rate, but for appearance purposes, I'll be abstaining. But I did want to draw out a number of these issues that I think are relevant to the community and decision makers. Thanks much.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to echo Ms. Winter's comments related to the burning bush. Personally, I like those. So, Dan, I take offense to the fact that you don't. And if they're considered invasive, then I am guilty of planting invasive bushes. So I'd certainly like to get to the bottom of that before I break any other environmental regulations here in the city. A couple questions for staff and some for developers, for the developer, and then just some comments in general. Becky, the costs per student that are factored in the fiscal impact, have we revised those costs for the updated debt service associated with the anticipated capital cost to build the schools?
Those numbers actually are not incorporated in the model at all. The capital costs transition to operating costs have been included in the model, but the capital costs themselves for building the new high school are not in the model projection.
So the debt service associated with the bonds is not allocated? Okay.
So we do the capital cost contribution, so that's principally how we try to work the capital side of it, and then the fiscal impact captures the operating costs. There are some capital operating costs that are now factored into the model, and that is one of the reasons that Becky listed as why the model has changed. The pupil generation count the cost per pupil count is $2,500 higher today than it was in 2016 when we were running this project, and that's part of the update of the model to try to capture some of those capital operating costs.
Okay. So another question, I know we've been debating this quite a bit as it relates to the age restricted, and I do appreciate all the work that's been put in by the city attorney as well as the developers to strengthen the language in the VCs related to that age restricted. I do have a question just from a pragmatic perspective, and I don't know if this can necessarily be answered here if folks on the school board aren't present. But from a practical standpoint, you've provided the provision in the lease to restrict folks that are under the age of 18 from residing there or being on the lease, I guess. But from a practical standpoint, how do you monitor or audit those students that may use that address as where they are residing or their legal domicile and then decide to enter into the school system? How do you deal with that from a practical standpoint?
Well, I'm not completely familiar with how the schools do it, but in general, I think they do track addresses for students. And going forward for this project, they would know that particular addresses should not have anyone under 18. And if, to the extent someone claims an address where they don't live, there are, and I don't know how much the Falls Church City Public Schools do, but I know when I worked with Arlington, they did they did regular investigations of where students actually resided, and there were false addresses that were found and things like
Right.
that. But they did look into it and tried to bill people for the cost of education who weren't actually residing in the county at the time.
So I know that there's a fairly extensive process, and that's actually been shored up even this year with the new superintendent in terms of vetting the various addresses. I personally would just like to know a little bit more because this is maybe one of the first large-scale age-restricted buildings that we've had from a practical standpoint. If we are monitoring that address and someone lists that as their address, and then you have to go back and say, well, that individual's not on the lease, and then the legal ramifications associated with that. So I think it's something, Sean, I don't know if you guys have a comment related to that.
Just happy to add the research or how we've implemented it in our previous is that there's really three mechanisms, obviously. There's the lease enforcement, which if someone's in violation of it, we notice them. Ultimately, it's the eviction. Clearly, we have the voluntary concessions. But at the end of the day, in other jurisdictions where we have done this, the enforcement also does occur, as the city attorney was saying, at the school level. So it's a collaboration between the building being excluded from their database, and then if that database is violated, then there's a feedback loop between the school and us as the owners.
Okay.
And we can certainly talk with the school's staff about how they can keep an eye out and make sure that enforcement occurs.
Okay. I just want to make sure that's been contemplated so we don't run into legal issues, because I know we spent a lot of time making sure that we feel very comfortable in terms of how this is structured. So thank you for that. Mr. Shields, you had mentioned that engineer and staff here will not approve a crosswalk as part of final site plan, but have they looked at the crosswalk that was proposed as an alternative here for Wells Fargo's corner?
Not in detail. So that is the reason we asked for the language, because they're, I think the goal is to allow that process to happen. And if it results in a conclusion that it can be done safely, then to sort of get back to where we were. But that has not yet happened. That would happen in the site plan process. I will say that sort of the first review of it, I think there's some skepticism about it. So I will share that, but we'll be able to look at it in more detail.
Have you guys confirmed that you could actually obtain an easement to put a sidewalk crossing there on Wells Fargo's site?
Well, that would be in the public right-of-way.
That was what I was going to say.
So you've explored that with the city in terms of that process, what it would take, because I would imagine that might take a little bit longer than we would imagine. You guys want to start construction in September?
Well, one thing to just recall is that all these transportation improvements are going to be probably the last things that go in. I mean, it's going to be late in the project when those things go in. But two, I think our thought is that everything's in the public right-of-way, so there would not be easement issues on the crosswalks.
I just didn't remember there also being a sidewalk over there, so that would have to be constructed as well, at least to turn the corner to WNOD.
There is a sidewalk.
There's a sidewalk that runs along the Wells Fargo site? On the ATM side?
Yeah.
On the Wells Fargo site? It doesn't go all the way to Grove. I must have
You
missed
probably neglected that when you were jaywalking.
on the West Street side? Yeah, okay. I thought that was all dirt and bushes, but I'm usually jaywalking at night, so that's my fault. Okay, the last point I'm going to make on that crosswalk, because I felt very strongly about it last week, is that this back and forth about we want to provide options. We realize there's an issue. It's sightline. We've got several different versions. We want to figure it out, but nobody wants to commit to it. I just want to tell, I don't want this to become turning a blind eye to an inevitability, which is a crossing that's going to be used. And I get it that no one wants to commit to a crosswalk, because if something happens, no one wants to say, well, I told you that we shouldn't have put it there, and you asked us to, so we striped it, we signalized it, somebody got hit. So it's more of a CYA to some extent. So that's got to be figured out, because people are going to cross there. And as that becomes more of a hub for nightlife activities, people are going to want to cross there. I think when you guys were here at work session, I asked you the question about the distance from one crossing to the next, and it was 220 linear feet. That's a long way. So people are going to cross that, and then that natural crossing from Grove on the W&O and D, I can flat out tell you, if you're riding your bike all the way from DC and people are sweating, they're huffing and puffing, and they want to stop in for a beer, that's where they're going to cross. So I think it's something that we have to figure out, and I appreciate you guys putting the dollars and the commitment in there, but that is something that the city and you guys have got to figure out. I don't know the answer. I'm not a traffic engineering expert, but that's something that we have to address, because I don't want somebody's kid or my kid getting hit because they made the mistake of crossing that because it was just a natural point. So that's where I'll leave that. Just a couple questions for the folks at Mill Creek, and I know that we've discussed this and it was covered front page of the Falls Church News Press. Can you guys confirm here publicly and on the record that you guys have that 7-Eleven site locked down so we don't run into a hiccup where this project gets delayed, where we already have project exhaustion, that you guys have control of the site? You've got the tenant that's going to be vacating, and that's not going to end up being a roadblock for your project?
So just great question. And to be a little bit more technical, we are the contract purchaser, so we have a legal control of the site. We have reached an agreement with 7-Eleven for them to vacate that will not prohibit the anticipated start date of September. So there are two contracts: our contract to purchase, which we plan on doing in September, and then another contract with 7-Eleven for them to vacate.
Okay. I also want to thank you guys. That was, and I'd referenced this last time, as the fortunate liaison to the Architectural Advisory Board, that 3-hour session where you guys spent a lot of time taking a lot of heat from folks in terms of the rendering. Wasn't that long ago. I will say that I expected when you guys came back from that with the renderings to lay into you for not having listened to all the comments that were made, but I felt you guys made a tremendous amount of progress in terms of taking those comments and that feedback and incorporating it, and I would agree with you. I think from a design perspective, it's a lot better than it was just several months ago, and appreciate you guys taking into consideration some of the design recommendations from just our work session a week ago. So thank you for that. A couple of the last comments that I'll make here. I've been highly critical of the way that movie theater was structured. I've been critical, and I'm still not a fan of the theater tax that was passed. That was before my time. It's not something that I can change. I don't agree with taxes to subsidize a specific business interest, but I do recognize the fact that you all reached a commitment in your lease with the theater that they will remain operating at a high level quality for at least 10 years. So that does give me some comfort. In terms of the viability of that, I'll also just share a personal story. I was traveling in Texas last week and was in our office in Houston, and noticed very quickly that there was a Studio Movie Grill 2 blocks away from the office, and it was their 7th location. I had not been in one yet, so I finished up in a meeting at 11 o'clock, ran over there and checked it out. Met with the regional manager, met with the on-site manager and the staff there, even took some time to sit in one of the seats. I didn't watch a movie because I was working, but I did check out the seats, the menu with the bar setup, and I do feel better about the viability of that business model. I do feel better about it in the city. I do recognize some of the challenges and the changes that we've seen in kind of the movie theater industry, but I do feel a little bit better about it now. So serendipitous or not, it wasn't on purpose. I didn't go to Houston to visit a Studio Movie Grill. It just happened to be there coincidentally. So I'm a little bit more excited about that particular business here. But still irks me to some extent, that theater tax. But again, that's not something that I can change at this particular point in time. So I would just say, generally speaking, as it relates to the VCs, and I want to speak about this in the context of Broad and Washington as well, because of the two large projects that I've personally seen since I joined. I've been pleased with the evolution of the voluntary concessions and working through all of the various board and commission comments, the citizenry, the staff, as well as council. I think that the evolution over these last two projects and where we've come with the voluntary concessions have been very, very positive. And I think that they continue to improve at every page turn and iteration. So for me personally, as I look at again, the progress and the evolution of projects like this and how it translates into voluntary concessions, I think that the city has seen some vast improvement from one to the next. So again, thank you guys for working with us. Again, thanks for staff for all of their tireless efforts, and thank you all for answering my questions tonight.
Okay, is there, Mary Beth Connolly, yes.
One last question. It's about the public art. I just want to confirm on VC number 19, there's a $25,000 contribution to the Little City Catch Foundation. That's for programming and other things. That's in addition to the public art that's
Correct.
going to be throughout the building.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Mr. Z?
I was going to say something and then make a motion, but you've got some questions.
It's okay. You can go ahead and say something, make a motion, and I have so I have a couple questions. I do have some comments. I don't know if people want to make comments as well, or people already sort of said their piece, but I do have a few things I'd like to say, and I do have a few comments as well. First off, I do appreciate the changes you've made. You've been really, I think, very good to work with, and we've heard an awful lot of comments from all sorts of people, and I think you've done a pretty good job of incorporating them, and I appreciate the changes, particularly you made to architecture. I think it's improved since the last week. I know there are certainly costs associated with changing from cementitious board to metal panels, but I think the project will be better for it, and hopefully a better investment and long-term return for you as well. In addition, I do appreciate the neighbors and the community as a whole, their willingness to stay engaged. This has been a long process, and many of the folks who were here, 3 or 4 years ago or whatever it was, are here tonight, and they're very interested in how their community looks and their homes and their neighborhood. So I appreciate them staying with us through this process, and I hope, that this has been a better project through your involvement. I think it has. A couple things along those same lines. One, the parking on Park. I do think that's really critically important, particularly if you look at, for example, there are townhomes, or at least townhome-styled apartments on Park. And if I lived there, I'd love to park on Park instead of going in 3 levels of garage. And so I think we really need to make sure that the parking, the integrity of the parking on Park Avenue is preserved, particularly for the single-family homes that are already there, and the church and other folks who predate this project. And so I would just encourage you to really keep that in mind as we go forward, that it really will be important, I think. And I think it's part of the covenant we make with the neighborhood when we do new development, that we're going to do all we can to preserve the integrity of what's there right now in their existing neighborhoods. So I would encourage you to think very hard, and I know you will. A question or two, is there any electricity in the tree pits? And I'm thinking holiday lights and some of the struggles we've had over the years. But I would love to see some electricity in the tree pits for outdoor lighting. I think it looks like, is it a yes or is it a no? Now, if you give some thought to running some conduit, we have put in holiday lights, or attempting to do that more and more in the downtown, which I think is quite festive and maybe very festive for your project as well. So maybe give some thought between now and site plan on whether you guys can run some conduit and light the boxes underneath the street trees. I think it'd be good for everybody. A comment about school kids and school calculations. I understand what's been done. I have to say I do have some concerns about this seems like a continuing reevaluation of parking of student generation. And particularly the idea that, well, this is a new project, it goes in the new project box. Those are old projects, they go in a different box, and so we're going to have to figure out a way to make them all work. Ultimately, new projects become old projects, and as they age, the numbers, I believe, go up. And so the idea of excluding older projects because they don't have the same numbers and this isn't really comparable, I think is a mistake. And I think it undermines credibility as well, and just the process and our means of evaluating projects. And so I think in the future we need to give some thought, maybe outside of a particular project before us, but how are we going to use numbers? What projects are we going to include? Is this a rolling number that every new project we reevaluate what the old project number was? And I don't think that's really good for the system, and I think people feel that we're somehow, trying to advance a cause some way or the other. And so I would give some thought as to how we might come up with a number and pretty much stick with it. And so that's a thought I have. I do think some of the sentiment about crosswalks, as a big walker, I can just tell you, I think most people, if they're kind of sitting there right across the street from your building, they're not going to walk, 100 feet one way or the other and then loop back and walk 100 feet back. I think you need to find a way to get people across effectively. To me, just eyeballing it, Wells Fargo site looks like a pretty good place, but I'm not going to argue with everybody about that. But I do think getting a crosswalk somewhere midstream would be a good idea. I have a particular question about the VCs, particularly 6C, and maybe I'm reading that wrong, but I might look to the city attorney. It has a 20-year window about condominiums, and I don't know if that's a hanger-on from when the ADUs were 20 years, or whether that's something that I'm just misreading. I don't know if you could take a look at that maybe as I blabber on and see if that needs to change or should change in some way or the other, or maybe I'm just mistaken. But it's 6C, and it talks about a life of 20 years for condominium conversion. And again, maybe I'm just reading it wrong. But if you could take a look at that as I continue to speak a little bit. Did I miss? Oh, I'm on the old ones. Did that change? Did I? Yeah, did I read the wrong version? Has it been changed? It is E.
Yeah, it's E,
This is E also.
but not C.
No, this is, I meant to say E. Did I say C? I'm sorry. E is what I was attempting to say. But 6E as in whatever E is, echo. It looks like it has a 20-year limitation as opposed to life of project. I don't know if that's my mistake or. Can we correct that through maybe a motion we might do in a few minutes? Mural as well, I do echo the idea of having a public process. It's like a giant sign in some ways. And I would also ask that you make sure the church has a seat at the table. They're the ones who are going to be staring at that thing forever. And it'd be great if they had some significant involvement in that process. I do have some comments. I don't know, do other people have comments they want to make before we take a vote? Or you got a whole bunch of them, do you? Few, okay. All right, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to hold off then on, I've got a few comments as well. When it comes back around my way, I'll make a few comments. So, Mr. Z, did you have something you wanted to say?
Excuse me, before you make a motion, can I go through the three little amendments that we've talked about? And then you can just reference them when you make your motion. One,
We want to hear you.
okay. At what is line 1232 in the staff report, which is part of the resolution, we should change the date of August 8th, which is the date of the conditions, to August 10th, 2018. And then we will add as a prohibited use, stores selling primarily electronic cigarettes, vaping supplies, e-liquid, or similar materials. And then finally, in VC 6E, we will strike the reference to within 20 years. So those three amendments, which you could just use by reference, would be amendments to the resolution that you adopt.
It's easy for you to say. Can you go through them again?
I can say them again, or you can just, when you make your motion, you can just make the reference to the amendments that we've noted.
I'll always take the easy way out. Thank you, City Attorney. This project has been cooking for a long time. For me, it came across my screen in the spring of 2012, which is quite a few years ago. And we learned that things do change over time. This started as a fairly monolithic scheme with 2 single-family houses And those two houses backed up to a 6-story, 80-foot high wall with a drugstore on the corner. It has gone through extraordinary changes. This project also has been characterized by intense and extensive public participation. Tonight is a demonstration of some of that over, again, 6.5 years of time. So during that long time planning, we have gone through a recalibration of how we do the financial net benefits analysis based on a change in student numbers. All the buildings that weren't built, that weren't occupied back then, are now filled. So we have access to granular data. We learned that movie theaters, indeed nearly all cultural facilities, require some sort of offset, some benefit. We've learned that during the course of our time on council. We also learned that over time that hotels are a fickle industry. And we can see the proposed age-restricted proposed housing is similar to long-term hotels, complete with concierge features. And this is part of a discussion from my friends at Marriott. Now, we've worked very hard as a city, and obviously, as has the developers, to lower the risk. It now generates apparently higher revenue, and there is, as has been stated, a high degree of interest by the market, with over 50% of the commercial spaces pre-leased. Most importantly, this project has been improved and survived the test of public opinion. So now is the time to pass this project. We wish we could do more, but 6.5 years is a long time. So doing more on this project is not going to make it much better. So is this a perfect project? No project is perfect, but this is a project that the city needs and deserves. And it is, as many of the projects that we look at, an important economic development offset for the cost of new school facilities. It is an important economic offset for the cost of new school facilities. And two, maybe some of the 40,000 cars that stream through the city will actually stop here and spend their dollars. Some of the things that I find appealing are, besides the dollars for our schools and library, we now have ADUs that could be set in perpetuity. We also have a large number of firsts. It's the first to change the orientation of the W&OD trail that is currently an homage to where the railroad bed is. This will be the first time that I know of, in course of the operations of the W&OD trail, where we are putting a kink purposefully to accommodate an enhanced pedestrian box. It's the first use of metal as a part of the architectural palette. It's the first to have a water feature. Not the Bellagio, but close enough for us. This is the first interior street with a large festival space. We've been shown time and again how that would look. I look forward to actually having a beer on that space. It's the first active adult multi-story structure in our city. It is the first maintained for life bike share with lots of bike parking. It is the first modern movie theater in the city. It will be the first movie theater in the city, period. And it's the first outdoor mural in the city. Despite the lengthy passage of time, we've managed to fill out this project with an abundance of environmental features. We have a reflective roof. We have the mechanical systems moved to one side to accommodate future solar panels. We have conduits leading down to an enlarged electrical room for controls and sensors. We have increased the number of electrical charging stations because the developer, I'm sure, has learned that we have a large abundance of Teslas in the city. We have obtained green and gold certifications, and even though this might be a little bit geeky, it's has ASHRAE 90.1 version 2010 plus enhancements for the commercial spaces, which means the commercial spaces, even though they're being described as cold, dark, whatever, they're going to actually perform at a higher level than what we see elsewhere. So that's to be commended. There's stormwater retention. And finally, at nearly the last minute, there's recognition of the importance of trees. So with that, without spending more time and increasing the time this needs to cook, I propose that we adopt TR 18-32.
With the amendments or with the changes?
With the amendments, referencing the amendments, the three changes that the city attorney has proposed. Thank you, Mayor.
Second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have other comments that people would like to make? Ms. Hardy?
Great. Thank you, Mayor. So I concur with everything that Mr. Z said, so I won't repeat the benefits of the strong fiscals and all the VCs. I think at the beginning of this process, when we revisited this project, I talked about how we wanted to make sure that we were raising the bar in the VCs. So I appreciate that you guys have made some significant contributions, especially around the retail plan, the architecture, affordable housing, and many other things, because the bar has been risen in the past 2 years. So I appreciate you guys responding to that. What we haven't talked about enough, though, is what we actually opened this meeting with, about how we wanted to welcome people of all kinds. And so what this amendment is about tonight is actually housing diversity. And our 2040 vision reflects the need to actually have more housing diversity. So this will be the first project where we'll have age-restricted apartments for the city. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing to have more people of all kinds in the city. And so I am happy to vote for this project. I also think that this project is important because it's going to catalyze development. So more good things can happen in the western part of the city, and we all know how much we have banking on that part of town. So I think that's critical to approve this tonight and welcome more development and hopefully good things to come. Let's make sure that we don't rest on our laurels, though, with everything going on tonight. I want to make sure that we hold you to continue engaging the community through the construction process. This project is not perfect, and there'll probably be lots of headaches as we go through construction, so I appreciate you guys being responsive so far, but let's keep that up and make this a good thing. Thank you.
All right, other comments? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate and concur with the comments of Mr. Z and Ms. Hardy. I agree with Ms. Gogol, who said this is going to be a big change for our neighborhood on the West End. That's correct. This is a big thing that we're doing. As far as I can tell from looking back at the city's history, this is the largest single addition of housing units since Tyler Gardens was built right after World War II, and almost 600 dwelling units were added on a property that had, I don't know, 2 or 3 farmhouses. That development really almost overnight transformed Falls Church from a sleepy little village into something like what we recognize today. And I think all of us would agree that today, Tyler Gardens, which we now call Winter Hill, Cherry Hill, is, you know, it is in many ways the city. It is the place where many people, old and young, live. It's a walkable community. The people who live in that community have helped sustain, you know, the business community in the city of Falls Church through the decades, even as, you know, we were buffeted by trends much larger than the city. The opening of Seven Corners Shopping Mall in the late 1950s, the opening of the Tyson's Corner Shopping Mall in the late 1960s, both of which dealt, you know, a kind of body blow to efforts to, you know, sustain commerce here in the city. And yet, you know, we persevered. And thanks to a fairly dense development like Tyler Gardens, Winter Hill, Cherry Hill, the city is here today and thriving, and is really the envy of the region in terms of our pace of economic development and the quality of the growth that we have seen. I hope that someday down the line, people will look back at this council and say that we chose a visionary path by approving this project and bringing to a side of the city which, let's just be honest here, is a little underserved by some of the more modern amenities, that we brought a project in that provided places to live for a variety of people, entertainment, dining, services, all the amenities that have been referred to here tonight, accessible to the W&OD Trail, and walkable to a substantial portion of of the city, on the west side especially. You know, we're in a race with America's next great city down the road there a little ways, Tyson's, which thinks that, you know, everybody is going to come to Tyson's. They're going to come to Tyson's to go to the movies, to go to the grocery, to go to restaurants. Just today there was an announcement of the 7 new restaurants that have signed on at the Borough and Tyson's. We are in competition with that community. And it's my hope that we will not allow ourselves to be Tysonized. We will not allow the city residents to have to get in their cars and drive somewhere else to go to the movie, to go to the restaurant, to eat in a nice restaurant, to eat at a fast casual restaurant, but that rather we will be able to provide those amenities for people here in the city to walk to bike to take a quick short hop ride to in their electric vehicle, and that we will build for our children a future of smart growth and modern suburban living that will sustain the community that we now love well into the future.
All right. Anyone else have anything to say at the present or in the future, I guess? All right.
Can we, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, but it's been brought to my attention that there are several references within the resolution to the August 8th conditions, or voluntary concessions. So if we can just clarify the motion that all references within the resolution to the August 8th voluntary concessions will now be to the August 10th voluntary concessions.
Mr. Z, is that acceptable to you?
I accept the changes.
And Mr.
As does the second.
All right. Okay, good. So any other comments? If not, I've got a few. One, I would just say, you know, as a kid, I went to movies at the State Theater. Of course, they were silent movies, but but now my kids hopefully can walk to the movies. And to me, this is pretty exciting. It's another piece in the puzzle of trying to make Falls Church a great place. A place that is vibrant, that's complete. We don't have to get in our cars to go to someplace else to have entertainment, to buy groceries. It's just another piece in the puzzle. And I would say it didn't happen by accident. When this project first kind of came out of the box, it was for an apartment building with a Walgreens on the ground floor. And that's what this started off as. And through extensive community, staff, and council involvement and developer involvement, this project was shaped into something much better. And that's what you see before us tonight. It's a long road to get here. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And as I said, it's another piece to me in the puzzle of making this a really vibrant, great community where people can walk and bike, have their kids walk down the street and go to a movie with friends, and really what I think in a lot of ways Falls Church is about. I'm also excited this project's bringing some vibrancy to a new part of town. You know, a lot of our development's been focused more on I guess it's the east side of town. And so having more development on the west side, I think is a good thing for that part of the community. We'll have our 10 acres of development coming up in the future as well. But to really draw our city together, you know, Broad Street goes the whole way through here, as does Washington. And so I think it's exciting to have some new vibrancy in that part of town as well. As Mr. Z alluded to, we've got 1 million cars that drive through Falls Church every month. And having another reason for people to stop and shop, spend their tax dollars here in the city, I think is pretty exciting. So anyway, I'm going to support the project tonight, and I thank everyone who's been involved in this long process of getting to where it is today. So thank you to you all. With that, why don't we go ahead and maybe take our vote, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Abstain.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
And the motion carries 6-0 with 1 abstention.
All right, well, thank you very much. Congratulations. Why don't we take ourselves a short break, and we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes if we can. All right. Let's get back at it. We've got some more work to do. All right. Says Ross will be out of here in 32 minutes or 26 minutes. Let's hope so. Let's go ahead and call the next item on the agenda, Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir. We have TO 18-01, ordinance to amend Chapter 48, Article 4, Division 10, B2 Central Business District of the Code of the City of Falls Church to amend Section 48-486, principal uses permitted by right, in order to allow additional uses and to edit language regarding persons with disabilities, and to amend Section 48-488, special exceptions for development projects on sites designated as special revitalization district for education and economic development and designated for mixed use on the future land use map.
Okay, good. Ms. Bell, welcome.
For B2. As you know, this provision that is proposed will create a new special exception provision for the B2 district for sites that are designated special revitalization district for education and economic development. I'm going to begin by going through the comments that we received both from yourselves, the Planning Commission, and from the school board, and then we'll step through the various changes that we've made to the code in response to the various comments that we've received. At first reading, we had a couple of questions and some follow-ups that we've completed, one of which was a question about what .96 FAR would look like on the site if it were developed. It actually works out to be about 418,000 square feet of development, so it's considerably less than what is in your goals for the site, which was actually 2.5 to 4.0 FAR, or somewhere in several million square feet of development, 1.2 to 1.5 million square feet of development. Examples of projects that are roughly at the .96 FAR would be the Broad Falls Apartments across from the Flower Building and the Reed Building, one at just under .96, the other just above .96.
Why are we talking about .96? I'm sorry.
This was one of the follow-up questions coming out of first reading.
Ah, okay, all right.
We also had several questions that have been put into the ordinance as amendments, and I won't go through those now, but I will mention that we are preparing a summary of this ordinance amendment. Once it's finalized, it will be available following this hearing for the PPEA solicitation. We did have some questions around what the council's options would be if the developer were ultimately to decide that some portion of the project could not be built, or if some of the uses needed to be changed. And the short answer is that we have code language that addresses it, but the bottom line is that the council would have the opportunity to review those as a new application, and there would be discretion based on comprehensive plans, site-specific studies, prior approvals, if any. A final question required the response of the city attorney, and I understand that she has provided you with information about how the zoning ordinance and any future state legislation would intersect. When we had the Planning Commission work session in July, in early July, we had a good discussion about the proposed amendments, and there were several questions pertaining to really what is the efficiency or the appropriateness of this two-step process. Does it really make a difference? Is it in use elsewhere? How does it change the role of the Planning Commission? We cited the example of Arlington County's phase development site plan and final site plan process as an example of a two-step process. That is currently in use in the nearby jurisdictions. And we talked about how the process as proposed in the two steps mirrors it somewhat in terms of general elements being approved at the first stage and more specific elements at the special exception site plan phase. There was concern expressed at the work session about the changed role of the Planning Commission, and we also heard that at the public hearing. The following work session that we attended was with the school board, and the school board raised a number of questions, then workshopped it themselves and sent you a memo at the end of last week. For the purposes of tonight's presentation, the report and the memo and their comments are combined. The school board was concerned about height in particular and the potential impacts of height on school uses. They appreciated the 7 stories that we have in the amendment for a by right secondary school. but we're concerned that 15 stories as an ultimate height potential on the commercial site might have an impact in terms of shadows on the buildings or other uses that the school would build on their side of the project. We recognize that that's a legitimate concern, and clearly within the review and evaluation process of a special exception entitlement or a special exception site plan approval, there would be an opportunity for the school board to comment on specifics related to height. It also stands to reason that the city will have a better idea about heights once the responses come in at the end of this month to the request for detailed proposals. So assessing compatibility of heights, clearly a reasonable question on their part, but something that will be a core element of the evaluation of any future project. Schools also asked about how they participate, and it is our expectation that they, like the other boards and commissions that the city has, would be among the groups that you would potentially refer both the special exception entitlement and the special exception site plan to. The school board also raised questions about the compatibility of adjacent uses and what their level of involvement and approval would be. We referred back to the same type of answer, which is that they will be active and engaged participants in the review process. There was a question about parcel lines and property ownership. And while that's not really an appropriate element for the discussion of this ordinance amendment, Ms. Aubrey was able to explain to them that this will be something that will be discussed at the campus coordinating committee later this month. There was a final question which had to do with photovoltaic cells, and whether or not they would be counted against the height limit. They would be treated as mechanical equipment and would not be an issue. The Planning Commission held their public hearing on the proposed amendments on July 16th, and while the vote was 5-2, there was concern on the part of at least 2 members about the application of this special exception provision to other places in the city. And so the ultimate motion that was voted upon reads as follows. They recommend approval of TO 18-01 to the City Council, scheduled for second reading and public hearing on August 13th, 2018, with the amendment that this change create this alternative site plan approval process specific to the West Falls Church Revitalization Economic Development Zone. In other words, the Commission's support for this particular amendment to B2 is limited to the commercial site on this particular, or with this particular designation. Now I'd like to turn to page 14 of the staff report and walk through the various changes to the code itself. Some of them are more clarifications than actual code, substantive code changes, but I'd like to just point them out to you if I could. At the bottom of page 14, lines 442 is where the first of the substantive changes are. We added a clarification about the role of the special exception site plan to state that it will function as any other special exception and site plan approved under the zoning ordinance and will establish final design. It's just clarifying a little bit about what the SESP is all about. We also added a statement following indicating that when a developer elects to go through the SEE process, the special exception entitlement, they do not have the option to revert back to the typical site plan approval process heard by the Planning Commission. Once they enter the door of the special exception entitlement, they will be required to go through the special exception site plan process. So that particular wicket or that particular opening is strictly the 2-part process, or they have to do something entirely different. The next change that we made is actually a correction under subpart D at line 469. We had initially discussed having information on parking reductions and modifications at the stage of the special exception entitlement. However, the words I wrote down were special exception site plan, and we believe that it's appropriate to have at least an initial cut on the parking at that first phase of approval so that you will have a better understanding of how the parking over the entirety of the 10 acres would function. The next modification made to the text is actually on page 16 at line 521, and this was one of the questions that came up at first reading. It has to do with phasing. We previously required that commercial construction proceed before a proportional amount of residential uses. We changed that for the Planning Commission discussion, and ultimately we are actually suggesting that this phrase, beginning with such timing, be struck. And the reason for that is that the timing that we through this ordinance amendment, would expect a developer and require a developer to provide a phasing plan with the elements of gross floor area, number of units, proposed parking, and the like for each phase and each building. But by establishing the proportions of development that have to occur, we could potentially be setting up a false choice, whereby we would be designing buildings or gross floor area, or creating a problem that really doesn't need to occur. And frankly, it's more properly addressed through the VCs and the comprehensive agreement than as hardwired code language. We think that that will better avoid unintended consequences. Under subpart G at the bottom of the page, this is the first reference to language about how the special exception entitlement and SESP process will link together. I think in our earlier discussion we talked about a first reading and a second reading, and actually what we have placed here is more correct, and it's that the review of the special exception entitlement will begin with council, which will then refer the application to whatever choice you make of council or of boards and commissions. Staff will review the application and the commission will make its recommendation, as will the other boards and commissions, and then finally there will be approval by the council. This is how the special exception entitlement would proceed. The same language would occur, or the same process would occur for the special exception entitlement, which is the second part of the process. The next change that we made into the code language is in subpart I at line 556. And this was a question that we received also at first reading about how amendments would be treated. And I think I mentioned earlier that amendments to an approved special exception entitlement would be treated procedurally as a new application. They would rely on prior approvals and meet the standards of the ordinance. The same would be true for the special exception entitlement. An amendment to that would be treated the same procedurally as a new application. On subpart 3 on that same page 17 at line 582, we have the language relating to the process for approval, and the format has been changed slightly in that section just to be more parallel to the format that precedes it. The next change is on page 18 at line 593, and we have added the criteria reference for the special exception process. What that means is that the special exception site plan would be approved or denied using the considerations in 481141 for approval of site plans, as well as the criteria that are used for approval of special exceptions. I mentioned the amendments language that is repeated here at 599. And then we've also clarified at 605 that at the SESP stage, at the special exception entitlement phase, that the council could impose conditions as appropriate to achieve their approval. And then last but not least, at 612, or 613 rather, we have repeated the process for approval, or excuse me, not the process for approval, but the function of the SESP approval, which is that it would function as any other special exception and site plan approved under the zoning ordinance and be expected to comply with that ordinance. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for using the word wicket in a presentation. Good to hear that proper use of that. All right, are there any questions or comments? Mr. Snyder, then Ms. Hardy.
Thanks a lot. So refresh my recollection as to why we're doing this.
We are doing this amendment to create a particular process for the commercial portion of the high school site based on its designation as a special revitalization district for education and economic development. And the purpose of this is to create significant flexibility in the process so that you can achieve the type of development that the goals and strategies that were adopted in January of this year support.
So, is there any evidence that the current process isn't working with the Planning Commission doing the normal site plan review? Because I understand the major change here is that the Planning Commission is being relegated to any other board and commission. Is that right?
The Planning Commission is not the approval authority for the SCSP in this case.
So I have a question for the city attorney. Our charter is very specific about the Planning Commission role. Have you run this statute against the charter?
I reviewed that when we were first doing it. I'll look back at it again and confirm that it works. But I
Because our
think
charter is really pretty unique in that it gives an extensive role to the Planning Commission. And I wouldn't want to approve an ordinance that isn't going to be consistent with our charter.
Yes, well, because these are special exceptions, they can clearly be handled by the city council. But I'll verify that again.
Yeah,
We looked at that early on.
Yeah, this is a pretty significant change, and we can say it's limited to this, but it may be viewed in the future. And I'm not sure I disagree with it necessarily, but I want to make sure I understand all the ramifications. And I'm not real sure that it would pass the muster under the charter.
Okay, I believe we looked at that early on, and I believe it does, but I
Okay.
will verify that because
Well,
I
your
haven't
opinion would
looked
be
at it
more
within the
important than
last.
mine on that, for sure.
I haven't looked at it in the within recent days, certainly.
So some of these other changes, I mean, I'm trying to understand, you sort of look at this in a vacuum, and what are we really doing here in addition to changing the procedure for approval? What are these, what's the significance of these changes in terms of what we're going to do and what we're going to see? Are we inadvertently pushing this development in a particular direction with any of these? Or maybe tell me a little bit more about these
Sure.
other changes other than the procedure.
The changes that are reflected in the report tonight and that I spoke to are really clarifications and adjustments based on the feedback we've received in the process with the school board and in the process with the Planning Commission, and then through first reading and the work sessions with yourselves. But fundamentally, what this ordinance amendment does is create a new special exception that allows for considerably more height and density for a larger site area than has been previously approved here in the city. So it gives you all much more flexibility than what you have today under the existing B2 language, which restricts height, which restricts uses to some extent, although it is the broadest approval potential as it exists today. So I think largely what it does is it signals your intent to approve a significant project on this particular site, both in terms of uses and complexity of project.
Another thing that I'll mention, that one of the reasons for developing a process like this was so that when we have a developer selected for the West End site, they would have some knowledge, because of the timing of the availability of the site, they will have some ability to understand early in the process, that is at the first step approval for the special exception entitlement, they will have some ability to understand what they are going to be allowed to do. But because they won't be prepared to have all the details, they would then be required to go through the second step, the special exception site plan step, so that we can then evaluate the details of their proposed development through that step. So they will get some outline of a promise or a guarantee that they'll be able to build certain height, et cetera. That's step one. But then we can evaluate the details when they're closer to being ready to build it. And then to avoid having too many steps for them to go through just because of this timing issue, this will enable that's why we made only one approval, that is just the council's approval for the special exception site plan proposal.
So I'm liking what I'm hearing. Are we losing any negotiating capability with this? I mean, are we shifting anything here at all that might reduce it seems like we're increasing that, at least at the council level?
I think that's true because the council will be looking at all of the site plan details as well as their details in order to combine that step. In addition, the council's going to have separately in its proprietary non-governmental capacity, you will have the comprehensive agreement by which you'll be able to have certain other factors or negotiated agreements as to how the developer will handle the site. And you'll have a little more flexibility on that side through the comprehensive agreement.
I mean, also, it benefits us and the developer because both of us will know, I guess, less than a year from now, right, what you're going to get. And then we can value it without having all the baggage of, well, how's it going to be designed? Where's the entrance? It's basically just, it's almost transactional in the sense that, okay, you're going to give us blank number of hotel units. You're going to guarantee this many of X, Y, and Z, and this is the price you're going to pay. And so we can sort of have a pretty straight up deal. And then you come back later and you go plan out all the, where's the garage entrance and like the more detailed aspects of it.
Does it put us into designing where the garage entrance is? I mean,
Well, the second phase will. I mean, it'll be like a normal, like we just did tonight. So, but the first phase of it won't be. So, I mean, to me, it's more efficient because people will know, a bank is going to want to know, what are you going to get before we're going to loan money on anything? Well, I'm going to go in this black hole. I hope to get, whatever, 600 apartments. Maybe you won't get them. But when you go through the first phase of this process, you'll know exactly what you're going to get. We're going to strike a deal on how many units, how many this and that, and the price. And then they'll come back later on with the details about how the garage entrance looks and what the building looks like, materials and things like that.
Okay, I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but I want some sort of a discussion as to what are we really trying to achieve with this? What are the benefits in terms of our negotiating capability? And what I hear is more certainty, both flexibility for us, but more certainty for the developer at an earlier point. Is that what I'm hearing? Plus, almost more flexibility in terms of height and density than we have under the current code. Is that?
I think those are both true. At the end of the special exception entitlement, which will time out pretty close in time to when you have your comprehensive agreement to be resolved, you're going to have a general plan for uses, heights, building layout. Many of the major elements of the entirety of the site will be approved, and those will be set unless the developer comes back and asks for an amendment. So you will have a lot of the framework known and understood, potentially valued, taken to the market for financing, et cetera. But the community will also have an understanding of it as well. The SESP, the second stage, comes in at the time when it's appropriate for the marketplace. So you're not having to second guess a market that may be 5, 6, 7 years out. But you can create enough of an understanding of what will proceed at that first stage that the developer can then submit relative to the market at the appropriate time.
And to me also, it allows us to value things so that we can go forward with the school. In other words, if they didn't have certainty, I don't think a developer is going to commit to either paying a certain price or entering a binding agreement with too much uncertainty. So, I think it benefits us in that we want to start the school and commit to the school, and we can't commit to the school until the developer commits to us. That's how I view it.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add, there's, with respect to the Planning Commission's input, they will be reviewing this, although the City Council will have final approval, that the special exception site plan phase will go to the boards and commissions, including the Planning Commission, who will have the opportunity to get you detailed recommendations and really assist council in making their final decision.
Right, but under the current procedures, the Planning Commission has additional legal.
Correct. Under the current
authority.
procedures, the Planning Commission gives the final approval to the site plan.
Right, and so.
And in this way, we're combining the
right.
detailed special exception with the site plan approval so that the developer would have fewer steps and council will have that approval authority.
Okay. I remain interested in the charter issue.
I'm going to get back to you further. I've been looking at it quickly. I don't see a problem, but I'm going to look at it more thoroughly, and we'll send you all an email.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lichtenhouse, did you have a comment?
I did. Thanks. Just a couple of points for clarification here. My understanding is this is a similar process that we have in Arlington County, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Second, specific to line 340 on page 12, there was some substitution of language there for a particular use type for individuals with intellectual disability. Am I correct in that that's just revised language that's more appropriate for?
That is actually part of a larger citywide effort to update this type of language to reflect state law. It's unrelated to the amendment for the special revitalization district.
I assumed it was some type of standardization and update of
Correct.
language, but nothing specific to the project itself.
Yes.
Okay.
And we just did it at this time because this ordinance was coming
Makes
forward.
sense. Okay. Just wanted to clarify on the record. On page 7, 139 on building height, can you give a little bit more clarification? Because I've seen this come through in comments, and frankly, it's something that's interested me as well as we proceed through this. But related to building heights, on how it can vary depending on the location. In that first sentence under building height under 139, it says compatible heights adjacent to the school site. From your standpoint, how do you interpret compatible heights? Because the school will be 7 stories plus some mechanical and photovoltaic on top, while allowing up to a maximum of 15 on the commercial site. So what do we deem compatible height with the school when we allow 15 on this site and it's a max of 7 at the school?
Well, I think the way this has been conceived of, it wouldn't necessarily mean 15 stories immediately adjacent to the school property, much less the school building. The 15 stories was sort of an upper limit for a TOD-type office building. Compatibility, I think, really depends on what's on either side of the line and the distance between them. It needs to be evaluated really when you have a proposal in front of you.
Sure. Yeah, it's my understanding, the way I interpret that is we don't want to put 15 stories of commercial building adjacent to the school that may affect either the photovoltaic array or just the fact that it'd be towering over the school. The reason I ask that question is there any concern from our perspective in terms of moving through the approval process where we're allowing for 15 stories, somebody comes in with a project, they're asking us to review it, they've maxed it out at 15 stories, and we said, well, actually, no, that's not really what we want. We don't want 15 stories across the board. We want it to be compatible depending on the setback and the location, and there's been some discussion over the higher density and the higher buildings at the corner. You see what I'm saying? So just the language of compatible, I want to make sure that we still have enough flexibility to drive that decision in terms of where we ultimately
I
end
think
up.
compatibility gives you a great deal of flexibility.
Okay. All right. And then finally, just to clarify, because this point has come up, my understanding after reading through all of this, that this does protect us from someone transacting the site and then falling back on what the typical permitted uses are, meaning they couldn't just develop self-storage and sit on it. And I'm making this very bluntly and basic comment, but this allows us to control absolutely everything about this commercial site, and we don't get stuck with something legally that is technically permitted that we don't want because somebody wants it as a placeholder because the market has changed.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, who else? Mr. Z.
Let me refer you back to line 522, where you took out the language requiring the timing of construction, commercial space to be have a relationship with the construction of a proportional amount of residential. That is a good catch. I think that that would have resulted in all kinds of strained approaches, and quite frankly would have tied our hands and the hands of the developers, resulting in less return. So that's a good catch. I'm just wondering what else in here, because reading through this, your eyes tend to glaze over after a few pages, and you've lived with this now for quite a while. Were there any other areas of potential friction or a misintent that that you decide not to to address, and tonight would be a good time to do that.
I think that was the most significant one, and that actually was a comment made by the mayor at first reading, that we ought to take a look at that to prevent some unintended consequences. I think the other things are largely clarifications about process and role and the actual steps for approval. So I think, if anything, we've made this more user-friendly than what we had before, because there's less sort of reading between the lines that needs to happen.
Now, after we've, and this might be for the city attorney, where we sign this and then we find there's a piece of this that is not going to help us out, or would hinder our ability to close, do we have any language here that says, like, notwithstanding anything that we've written in the preceding 23 pages, we reserve the right to waive any of it?
I believe there's actually language that allows council to modify some of these requirements, but I think also, should we find that there's really a problem, in other words, something we've really missed, and we have spent a lot of time, Carly, Aubrey, and Susan and myself have spent a lot of time working on this. I think, we would look at a potential amendment if we really needed one, but I think we have a couple things working together here. We will have this ordinance, which I think, it's been scrubbed for a while, which is not a promise, because one can always find an issue later that you didn't see. But I think that we could make amendments, and I think that we also have our comprehensive agreement that's going to work with this, that can help capture some of the things that can't be specified in an ordinance.
Okay.
But I think we're in pretty good shape. We did go through and catch several of these things. One was that in some places we had assumed that the standard for special exceptions would also apply along with the standard for site plans, and we've got it clarified in there now. So.
Yeah, I thank you for that, and sometimes it's it's better that we don't be prima facie about saying that we can change this at will. So, but we do. I do appreciate the comfort that gives. And to finally comment here, I want to thank you, Ms. Bell, for remembering all these questions from June 25th and actually addressing them. I really appreciate you taking a look at what .96 FAR would look like and answer it in such a full nature. Thank you.
Sure. Ms. Hardy.
Well, Ross asked one of my confirmation questions, but the other one I had was around the school board comments. Have we gotten the responses back to them, and are they satisfied with those responses?
We have not shared responses with them specifically. Most of the answers you have in here are the answers I provided at the time of the work session, but not since their letter came in on the 3rd.
So should we assume that if they sent a letter, that meant they weren't satisfied with the responses given?
I think they wanted to be on the record in writing to you all.
Okay.
To you
I think
all
I'm
and the
mainly
manager.
interested in I think a lot of their questions are around, what's the engagement with the school board and making sure that the building ends up being compatible with the schools. Right. And I think we have mechanisms kind of in place for some of that, but I think they wanted to maybe formalize it. And so I wanted to make sure that that was satisfactory to them. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions or comments, Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, I am concerned about this language in 522 because removing any reference to commercial being done before residential, I think sends exactly the wrong signal. I mean, I understand that we don't want to tie us up to a particular element here, but I don't know why we're deleting the whole idea. I mean, I really don't.
I think that will be subject to negotiation. The phasing is a point that can be articulated in the approvals. And in fact, in the RFDP, we note that. But I think laying it out as it was, it's so explicit that it can't be done that way, goes against what is intended, which would be a negotiation where the city will look out for its interests. And in all of the discussions in the first round of the process, we did look very carefully about how they structured their phasing. All of the proposers did have significant commercial in the early phases of the project. They know that's an interest of ours. We've said that to them at the conferences, And I think they expect that to be our consistent point of view on it.
I think a couple questions came up on this when we did the, first reading? And I think that we went back, and as we sat and worked through these changes, we had some discussion about what could we do to make this, to phrase this in a way that would work for each project. And it really proved extremely difficult because of the individual nature of what the proposals will be. And so the feeling was that we will have a phasing plan from the developer, and they've been led to understand that we need to get the commercial first, and we can work that out through the phasing plan that gets approved as part of the special exception entitlement, and that would address the specific project itself in a way that any language we were trying to put in here could potentially cause a problem depending on what the proposal was. So I think the individuality of the proposals meant that it was impossible to put language in here that we felt would work well for all projects.
So there's no intent, we should see how to phrase this. So the intent is that, depending on the details, we'll still push for commercial before residential.
Well, I mean,
Phrase it that way?
How would you phrase it?
Concurrent with. In the proposals that we got, there was commercial in the first phases along with residential. I mean, that was a typical thing that we saw. And I think that with kind of what our knowledge of that site is that is probably going to be needed in terms of placemaking and in terms of a lot of the other city goals.
I mean, you could put in language that says something like, such timing shall ensure that the commercial uses will be, constructed in connection with, something that's kind of a little bit tamped down a little bit, but I think it would get the point across. I'm not sure it has a whole lot of teeth, but it does convey the fact that we want to get.
And I think that idea has definitely been conveyed in the RFDP.
Absolutely.
And the special exception entitlement is intended to be approved essentially concurrently with the comprehensive agreement, so that everything is going to come together at that point, and so that we have this phasing plan with the developer we've selected that fulfills what's been requested in the RFDP.
Any other comments? Do you want to attempt to reword that language?
I'd like to try.
Is this a first reading or a second reading? I can't even remember.
This is second reading.
Maybe I do have a comment on that. I would urge caution in injecting construction phasing. This document is primarily one of process and describes the container, describes how it looks, how it would perhaps function, talks about reduction parking. It would, we could take this further. We're going to interject a commercial versus residential phasing. We could throw in all kinds of stuff with respect to environmental stuff, and then where does it stop? It's just I think where you've deleted that in its entirety is the proper way to address this issue. You already have it. Not only is it understood, but you've requested that it be embodied in the response. So I think it serves no purpose to impose a restriction, and it could be contraindicative to what we're trying to achieve at the end of this. They say, well, you said you want to build a certain way. We can't make any money off this. We don't have it in our plans, so we can't build it that way. So you're going to have to cut us some slack and lose some money in the process. I just don't want to see that happening.
Other comments?
And let me also add that I've built projects. I've built submarine bases. I built a good part of, and designed a good part of White Flint Shopping Center. I've gone through the entire life cycle of White Flint Shopping Center. So I'm telling you, as soon as I saw that, I would say this is a good place for me to hide some money. This is because you told me it had to be done this way. And who are we to say you can do it differently? I mean, that's where the breakdown negotiations would occur.
Anything else? Any other comments anyone has? All right. Mr. Snyder, do you feel strongly about that?
I do.
All right, well, why don't we see if we come up with some language quickly that maybe some kind of compromise, see if we can get that to work. I mean, I think the idea that you have to do the commercial first is a mistake, because my recollection or my idea is that generally most people will not do one and the other, but it'll do them both together. And so I think that does not work to say one comes before the other. The idea that they're intermixed, that there's intermixed as shown on a phasing plan, I think is appropriate and relevant, and what will actually come is that they will have a mix of both. And I don't know if you can go much farther than that.
And this is just thinking right now, but perhaps we could say it in a different way, that such timing shall ensure that residential uses are not constructed unless commercial uses are built at the same time, or something like that.
I'm not sure you want to do that. I mean, if you have like a 4-phase project, you may have one that's all residential. You may, I mean, I don't know. I guess I would just want to.
And this is, I think this is where we in our discussions were finding it very difficult to come up with something that would work.
Right. As a practical matter, I think what we kind of concluded is that if one is really lagging the other use, you end up with people trying to figure out ways to work around it, but sort of attempt to achieve the intent. And so we thought it was just cleaner to rely on the VCs that are tied to the phasing plan and the comprehensive agreement to provide protection to the city in terms of you getting what you want out of the project.
I mean, I don't know if something like this works. It's not really that great, but such timing shall ensure that the commercial uses will be constructed in approved phases in connection with residential uses. I mean, it's just something that's, it's not absolutely crystal clear, but maybe it gets the idea across.
How about something even more simple? Proposed timing of construction as related to construction phases or parcels for each element that assures that the commercial elements will be constructed. Total flexibility, but gets the point across. And I think addresses the flexibility that you're trying to get. So it'll read proposed timing of construction as related to construction of phases or parcels for each element that assures construction of the commercial elements.
So that's at the end of the first sentence.
Right.
That ends after each element, you just add that ensures that commercial uses will be constructed.
Right.
I can live with that.
You okay with that? Yeah. All right, everyone else okay with that? All right, what else we got? Anything else? We have a motion. I'm going to call for public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to public comment. We have a motion.
Let me move, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I move approval of TO 18-01 with the amendment on, in lines, beginning with the amendment on lines 520 and 521 as discussed.
We have a second?
Second.
All right, Madam Clerk.
Ms. Connolly? Yes. Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right, what's next? Let's keep going.
Consent items. And there are 2 bike share items.
All right, Mr. Shields, what say you?
2 requests for contract approvals for the bike share project. The first is authorization for the city manager to sign an agreement with Motivate International for bike share operating and maintenance services to expend up to $165,000 per fiscal year and to renew the contract for 2 additional one-year terms subject to appropriation of funds. And I will just remind council that the city has received a grant that is expected along with the cost recovery together that would cover the cost of those operations for the initial years of the bike share program. The second item on consent is authorization for the city manager to sign an agreement with 8D Technologies Incorporated for bike share stations and startup equipment, and 2 agreements with Motivate International for bicycles and station assembly, placement and program launch services, and renewals of the above contracts for 2 additional one-year terms, and expend up to $2 million combined throughout the life of these contracts subject to annual appropriation of funds. And for this one, this is paid for out of a grant using federal dollars, and one of the reasons we're here asking for this contract approval today as opposed to several months ago is because of the nature of those federal dollars. It's been a very arduous procurement process, but we believe that we've achieved victory, and so we do ask for council's authorization of these 2 contracts.
Mr. Snyder.
I move approval of the 2 consent items.
Second, anyone?
Second.
It's already on the second. I'm going to call for public comment. Anyone wish to speak to this matter? Tom? No? This matter is closed to the public.
Tom's awake.
Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yep.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right.
Mayor, can I just ask a quick question?
Yes?
Why, when and where are these going in?
Where is per the plan that was reviewed by the council about a year ago. When we will immediately place the orders. They do need to be fabricated. They don't have this equipment just sitting in a warehouse, which is just the way it is, but it is unfortunate. So we're shooting for a rollout this fall, but if it turns out that the fabrication is going to mean that they're going to be delivered really close into the winter months, then we'll need to make a decision, which we'll coordinate with the council whether it's wiser just to wait until the spring. But we're pushing hard to try to get it out this fall if that's possible.
Given that it was maybe a year ago since we talked about locations, could we recirculate that among council and the community?
All right, what else we got on this? Okay, let's move to the next item. Is that Eagle Eye Duncan's purview?
Is it time for minutes?
No? What else do we have?
Committee and council.
Oh, council and committee. Yeah, anyone have any committee or council liaison? All right, let's hear it.
There's the Budget and Finance Committee meeting Friday morning this week, 8 a.m. All are invited. And the Run for the Schools, the Fall Festival is September 15th, and the Run for the Schools is the 16th. I think 2 years ago we did a booth. I don't know if anyone has any interest in doing that again this year. An hour or so of get to see council at the Fall Festival.
Are we running together?
We have the last couple of years.
That's a strong word, running.
Running.
Well, when I ask that question, are we running or are we just together?
We enter as a team.
On the course.
That's a big no, cowboy.
Okay. I'm still trying to
Running
get a
at the
team
beginning,
shirt over here.
walking, and then crawling. It's sort of a,
Well, I'm running for the schools.
all right.
I will
all right.
race.
I'm walking vigorously.
So shall we set up a team, a council team, and
I'm watching Ross and
and
Phil.
shall we have a booth? Do we want to have a booth the day before? An hour of get to see council at the Fall Festival?
Come to the CBC booth.
Yeah, we all do that.
I
Sure.
think it's the Festival of Falls Church. Or no, the Falls Church.
Falls Church Fall Festival.
It's something.
Taste of Falls Church.
I don't know.
Yeah. Festival.
New branding.
So we like having a booth. Is that a general consensus?
Well, we're just gonna hang out at
Just
the
hang out, just
city,
be-
at the
Yeah. It's not a special booth. It's just a time when council would be there.
Oh, yeah,
People
yeah.
want
But
to
is there
pop
any
in.
food going to be there?
There'll be lots of food at the Taste of Falls Church.
No, I mean at our booth. I know.
So this suggestion
I
I had
I want to be a judge so
at
bad.
the
They never
George
asked me.
Mason tailgate
I
event.
was a judge last year. It was amazing.
Oh.
Isn't that good?
I'm not gonna. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Oh.
The
So
highlight of
besides
my
just
career.
us hanging out, if we can have posters or poster boards for the development proposals.
Yeah.
Like we talked about doing it for the George Mason tailgate event the weekend before, but if things are ready, it'd be nice to actually have something to talk about
Right.
rather than just come meet your council members.
Ourselves.
We talk about where the kids should go in the library.
All right.
Also, the mayor's meeting is canceled for Wednesday, but there's the Van Buren
we still doing
Bridge
the
ribbon
bridge
cutting at
When is
10
that?
a.m. on Wednesday.
This Wednesday?
Yes.
Can you send out a reminder of that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I was
Don't look at me like that. I should have it on my calendar. Is that what your eyes are telling me? Why-
We're going to rename it the Dave Tarter Memorial Bridge or something.
After it falls
So,
down.
I like
that.
Nothing we'd forget, though, to do.
All right. All right, what else do we have? Mr. Z?
I'll be going to Richmond next Tuesday, the 21st of August, to meet with a stakeholder group, VML and VACO, that Dominion is putting together to hear our responses and suggestions for what to do with money available for solar and wind.
Cool. All right.
I think the Economic Development Committee will not meet on August 23rd or 30th. We will proceed to the fall.
Thank you.
All right, what else? Anything? Okay, now we're on to the Duncan minutes.
So, Mr. Mayor, on the minutes of May 22nd, 2017, on line 59, and in every other place that you can get a hold, Founders Row is spelled the way we now know it to be spelled.
We changed that somewhere along the line.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's one of these minutes we changed it in the minutes themselves, and then on line 202 there's a space after 2017 that you need, and I move adoption of the minutes of May 22nd, 2017 as corrected.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes
Minutes
have
of
it.
June 12th, 2017, line 36. Oh, it's Citizens for a Better City, not community. Line 119 is Founders the New Way. And line 194 is also Founders the New Way. And with that, approval of the minutes of June 12th, 2017 as correct.
And there were several name corrections that I sent to Ms. Heath offline that she's going to fix as well.
Yeah. Citizen names.
All right. Do we have a motion? Oh, you did. Did someone second it?
Second.
All right. Any thirds? No thirds. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. All right. What else do we have? We do have a closed session, right? In a few minutes. So what else do we have on this agenda? Nothing. All right. So let's go on to a closed session. I'm going to read a motion. And we can do this on television and then go in closed session. Upon a motion made by Council Member Connolly and seconded by Council Member Hardy, and passed by voice vote of City Council, Council went into closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A29 for discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, specifically evaluation of proposals submitted in response to RFP 0501-18 George Mason High School, West Falls Church Economic Development. Councilmember Connolly.
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Lichtenhouse.
Yes.
Snyder.
Yes.
Z.
Yes.
Tarter. Yep. All right. Why don't we take a short break while the cameras get turned off, and we will bang this out. All right, well, let's come back at a closed session upon a motion made by Council Member
Connolly.
and seconded by Council Member
Happy birthday, Letty Hardy Duncan.
Duncan. All right. And passed by vote of City Council. Council reconvened in open session. Councilmember Connolly?
Yes.
Duncan?
Happy birthday to you. Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Snyder? Z?
Yes.
Tarter? Yep. All right, it is, I think it's 12 o'clock a.m. right now. Upon a motion made by Council Member
Connolly.
Connolly, and seconded by Councilmember
Duncan.
Duncan, and passed upon affirmative roll call vote in open session. It was certified that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session or meeting by the City Council. Councilmember Connolly?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Snyder? Z?
Yes.
Tarter? Yep. All right. We are at a closed session. We've done a certification. There's only one thing left to do.
Move to adjourn.
No, that's not the one thing, Miss Hardy. Who wants to sing happy birthday to Letty? Come on, let's do it. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Letty. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Right. You know, if you had postponed, if you could just talk for like another 30 seconds, we couldn't have done it because it would have been tomorrow. So we just got it in under the wire. It's 11:59. Anyway, happy birthday, Letty. Have a great trip.
Move
All right,
adjourn.
All right, let's do it. We are adjourned.